Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Warhammer 40K short story collection. It's like a third take. I'm just going with this one there, no matter what happens. This is a collection of all of the short stories I did over the years, quite short ones, little snippets that come from a lot of different sources within the lore books and all over the place in terms of the lore, all the way back to 3rd edition going through to the current era. And yeah, I hope you enjoy them. There's some real gems in here for you true Warhammer 40k, Grimdark connoisseurs. And some of them are really really important bits of the lore that are just like foundational to the story of everything. So yeah, you'll get a lot out of this if you've never heard them before. They were originally uploaded separately over the years. Some of them about like 5 or 6 years ago. But obviously, and I won't whinge about it, I'm just telling you, I had to nuke the channel last year because I got attacked, essentially, by scammy copyright companies and whatever. But these things are coming back gradually. I'm mostly concentrating on doing new stuff, to be honest. But I'll put most of the stuff up that's going to be returning. But if you are after any of the old stuff that isn't on the channel at the moment, then do search for me over on any of the podcasty places, normal places where you get stuff. Search my name, Aborder Prince, and you will find my podcast feed. And everything is still on there. Perfectly fine. It's all fine. Yes, if you would like to, and it's a real mix. There's like Space Marine stuff, there's Tau stuff, there's a lot of Imperial Guard stuff, there's some Inquisitor stuff. They're all gems, and well worth listening to. I hope you enjoy them. Again, some of them were made a while back, so, you know, bear that in mind. I've done what I can to improve the audio. I've also cut out some of them waffling at the end of most of them. I left a few bits in because some people seem to like that sort of stuff, so apologies if that isn't too distracting. And like I say, I've tried to improve the audio as best I can using various means at my disposal. So yeah, I hope you enjoy them. I'll be back again very soon with, as I say, new stuff. I'm in the process of pulling together a large video, a large 4-hour video, and there's a big 10-hour video. In fact, 2 10-hour videos, but they all take time to make, and we're going into the summer holidays now. And yeah, I've got a 3-year-old son, so my time is a little bit taken up with more important things. Unfortunately, I have to be a good father and take him to the zoo and Thomas Land. But anyway, that's none of your business. I will be back again with more stuff though, very, very soon. So do stay tuned. And yeah, if you could give this video a like and let me know in the comments any area of the lore of 40k you'd like me to cover and what you thought of this. I'd really appreciate that. Massively helps me with the algo gods, the machine spirit. And that's one of the reasons why I've combined them all together as well, because my channel is pretty much like a long-form video channel now compared to what it was when I first started. So if I started uploading 10-minute videos, it'd really anger the machine god. It would anger him and he would punish me. So it's all going up as one big thing now. So watch it all. Watch every second of it. I'll be back again very soon, though. And I just want to say thank you as well to everybody who's been supporting the channel as a channel member or a supporter on Patreon. You guys have really helped me out over the last couple of months where we've had this difficult situation. But we're coming through it now. We're almost back to where we were. So I really, really appreciate that. And if you'd like to help me out, well, we'd massively appreciate it as well. No pressure, but if you do, I really appreciate it. Follow the links below, become a member or a patron on Patreon. And what else is there? Oh, yeah. Give me a like. Give me a comment. Give me a hype. Make sure you're subscribed. Hit the little bell. All that stuff. Massively appreciate it. We're taking this take, all right? I can't be bothered to try again anymore. This is what we're going with. I'll be back again soon. I'll be back again soon. And yeah, we've got some great stuff. And if you haven't caught any of the new stuff I put out, go check out the channel. There's a lot of stuff on there if you've missed out on the last month or two. That's all I've got to say. I'll see you again very soon. May the Emperor protect. Ave Imperator. Cue the intro. Cue the intro.
For the glory of the Imperium!
Sergeant RAFEAL. The fading light of Armageddon's bloated red sun washed feebly over the desert encampment. The twin moons started their long, slow climb into the heavens. As the searing heat of the day faded, the camp came to life. The roar of great engines filled the air as the crew of the Shadow Swords started up their enormous tanks. Slowly, drugged by the heat, the men of the 4th Imperial Guard Army of Armageddon emerged from their bubble tents into the dying daylight. The men were tired, listless, not quite awake. Sergeant RAFEAL listened to them grumble about the heat, the constant threat of spider scorpions, the possibility of an orc attack. Their complaints seemed almost amusing to the Blood Angel. These men thought of the desert lands outside their hive cities as the closest thing to hell they could find without dying. How little they knew, thought RAFEAL. This place was a child's nursery compared to the world on which he had been raised. These men's lives, hard though they were, had been sojourns in paradise compared to the upbringing he had endured. But then, he thought proudly, he was a Blood Angel, one of the children of Sanguinius, who had died preparing the Emperor's way against the great evil one himself. RAFEAL studied the dunes, so like and yet so unlike the deserts of Baal Secundus, his birthworld. Convection currents raised small dust devils in the air. Heat haze shimmered on the horizon, making distances all but impossible to judge. One of the great sandstorms, capable of burying an army alive, could be approaching at this very moment, and they would not know, unless warned by a weather augury from one of the monitors placed in orbit by the Adeptus Mechanicus. It was true, this was a harsh land, but it could not compare to Baal Secundus. Here the wasteland was a chemical slag, byproduct of 100 centuries of industrial production, rivers of sludge, soiled by the output of hive cities like Tartarus and Acheron, ran down to the poison seas. On Baal Prime, the only sea was the sea of glass, a smooth, shimmering plain of silica fused by the detonation of ancient forbidden weapons. The deserts were multicoloured wastes, the dusty corpses of continents made uninhabitable by the deadly chemical death clouds used long ago in the wars that ended the dark age of technology. Here men lived in teeming hive cities, protected from the elements by mile-thick plasteel walls. Only the mighty orc invasion by warlord Gaz Skull Fracker could have driven them into the desert. On Baal Secundus, all the old cities were dead, and their rubble was inhabited by scavenger tribes. Only the shunned ones, their faces eternally masked, dwelled among the radioactive ruins, their factories using materials extracted from the corpses of their cities to churn out the endless stream of weapons they bartered to true men and deviant alike. Here, the worst the weather threatened was sandstorms, capable of shredding an unarmoured man down to the bone. On Baal Secundus, there were hailstorms, where 1,000-mile-high winds uprooted great boulders and sent them tumbling across the tortured land, where lightning bolts, containing the power to shatter mountains, lashed the scarred earth. There was acid rain, which could dissolve armour and eat through flesh. There were chemical blizzards, whose multicoloured snowflakes, laced with the old deadly neurotoxins, could dissolve nerve tissue in fiery agony, or send men mad with strange hallucinations, or open up the mind of the potential psyker for the dark influence of demons. Here the main threats were heat and thirst. On Baal Secundus, there were other more insidious ones. Poisoned wells and deadly rad zones, where the only warning of oncoming death was a strange glow in the night sky, or the sudden clinking chitter of a rad alert amulet. Here on Armageddon, the only living threats were land dragons and spider scorpions. Only now, during the orc invasion, would a traveller be attacked by armed warriors.
On Baal Secundus, roving hordes of mutants and true men wandered the ash deserts, fighting terrible battles for the possession of scant resources, defending the sites where they dug up the artifacts of the ancients or the holy battlegrounds where men might join the chosen. Raphael thought back to those days with something like nostalgia. Then, he had been a simple warrior, fighting with nothing more than his life, and a chance to join the chosen. Now he was a blood angel, and the awesome responsibility of defending mankind against its enemies rested on his shoulders. Now he was sworn to uphold the legacy of Sanguinius, no matter how heavy that burden became. He had donned more than a protective suit when he put on the crimson armour of the Blood Angels. He had donned the mantle of a tradition that dated back to the time of the Great Crusade, when the Emperor had walked among men. He had joined the endless procession of mighty warriors who had marched into battle beneath the Blood Angel's banner. He had become a successor to men who had defended the Emperor's palace on Earth, the holiest site in the entire galaxy, against the treacherous legions of chaos. When the sanguinary priests had implanted the gene seed that controlled the process that transformed him into a superhuman warrior, he had implanted a living link with the Primarch of his chapter. For the gene seed contained cells cultured from the gene runes of Sanguinius himself. When he had drunk from the chalice incarnadine, he had sipped wine mixed with the cloned blood of the Winged One himself, and that blood had mingled with his own to start the transformation. When he had been shut in the great golden sarcophagus, and the meditation nodes attached to his head, visions of the Blood Angel's life had flickered through his mind. Now he could remember them only when the black rage came upon him, and visions of Sanguinius's last moments danced through his mind, driving him insane with grief and fury. But he knew that he had shared some of the thoughts of one of the Emperor's Primarchs, and had been granted a privilege given to few men, even Space Marines. With such privileges came a terrible burden. He knew that the Blood Angels were a dying chapter. Their fading might take many thousands of years, but it was happening, slowly and inexorably. Tiny errors in the gene runes had accumulated down the long centuries, small flaws that gathered together to produce greater ones. The first generations of the Blood Angels had not suffered from the Black Rage. That had come later, had crept in so slowly that it had barely been noticed until too late. There was the thirst, too. That sometimes irresistible longing to drink the blood of their enemies that took even the most restrained members of the chapter. Some of the chapter's more philosophically inclined members had theorized that perhaps this taint might lead them to chaos. Raphael knew this was impossible. The Space Marines of the Blood Angels would rather die than allow that to happen. Still, it was a discomforting thought. A man in the uniform of guard lieutenant approached him, weary respect visible in every line of his face. He gave a perfect salute, as if standing on a parade ground, not in this burning desert. Sergeant Raphael turned his gaze on the man. "Sir, my men are almost prepared to move out. Are you ready to depart, sir?" "We have been ready to depart all day," thought Raphael. It seemed best not to demoralize the man by telling him this. His warriors lacked the superhuman hardihood of a Space Marine. There was nothing to be gained by rubbing this fact home. The Guard were true soldiers of the Emperor, even if they were only men. Only men, thought Raphael, and caught himself. Yes, to be a Space Marine was to be more than an ordinary man. It was to have keener senses and stronger muscles, faster reflexes and deadlier weapons. It was to have a life many times longer than an ordinary man. The Space Marines shared some of the gene runes of the immortal Primarchs. Yes, indeed. Being a Space Marine was to be more than a man, but it was also to be a man. That was never to be forgotten. Space Marines were drawn from ranks of men. It was their duty to serve man. Many generations ago, entire chapters had forgotten that and fallen into heresy and worship of chaos. "Yes, Lieutenant," We are ready." Suddenly, he heard a single chime, like the tolling of a great bell, resound in his comnet earbead. He touched the rune of communication and listened to the voice of his company captain. "Sergeant Raphael, you and your men are to report to company headquarters at once. You have been assigned to a most urgent mission. The Emperor be praised." "The Emperor be praised," responded Raphael. "We are on our way."
Adept PALMARTIS. I have no idea who wrote this. It's from the First Tau Codex. Adept Raphael PALMARTIS stepped off the crew ramp of his shuttle and squinted in the harsh glare of evening sunlight. The air was hot and stagnant. Not a breath of wind stirred, and he could feel sweat prickling on his brow. A shadow fell across him as the giant figure of Captain Telos of the Imperial Fists joined him on the landing platform. The Space Marine seemed untroubled by the heat, despite the heavy armor and ceremonial fur cape he wore. Their shuttle sat atop an immensely tall structure, and PALMARTIS could see for miles in all directions across the Tau city. Unlike most Imperial cities, this was elegant and very open. Gleaming towers of marble, white steel and glass, soared majestically, interconnected by airy walkways and translucent bridges that seemed to defy the natural laws of gravity. He could see dozens of long, rail-bound grav trains snaking their way soundlessly through the city, crossing and intersecting in a graceful ballet, stopping briefly every now and then at various structures before moving off again. A section of wall across the platform, irised open. A robed figure emerged from the sunlight to meet them. PALMARTIS kept his face expressionless as he saw that the figure was not Tau, but human. The man was powerfully built, though nowhere near as formidable as Telos. His skin was deeply tanned and lined, the texture of old leather, and his eyes sparkled with wry amusement. He raised a hand in greeting, and PALMARTIS could see the outline of a faded imperial eagle tattooed on his forearm. "Greetings! My name is Harmon Delphi, and I welcome you to Ta'olku," said the man. PALMARTIS bowed in response, concealing his displeasure at this calculated insult. The tattoo on Delphi's arm marked him as a soldier of the Emperor's army, and, in Imperial eyes, a deserter and traitor. He was sure that Telos had seen it too, but thankfully the captain said nothing. "I thank you for your greeting," he replied. "It is pleasing for us to be here, and I look forward to conducting my discussion with Eonor Ta'olku Kayana. I am sure that between us, he and I can resolve the Nimbosa colony dispute amicably." "Yes," began Delphi, spreading his hands in a gesture of apology. "Regrettably, Kayana has asked me to convey his most sincere apologies to you, as he is extremely busy at this time and is unable to receive you at present. He hopes you'll bear with him in this, and meanwhile offers you the hospitality of the city." PALMARTIS nodded politely, a measure of his earlier optimism returning. Eono Ta'olku Kayana was a fool to play these petty games. Every day they spent here in negotiations brought the retribution of the Imperial Navy closer to Nimbosa. He said graciously, "Aeon Ta'olku Kayana is most considerate. Please convey to him thanks for his hospitality, as I am sure we shall enjoy our stay here. Now, if you would be so kind, please convey us to our quarters." Delphi smiled, then led them through the opening he had emerged from, and along a series of featureless white corridors. Within moments, PALMARTIS had lost all sense of direction, though he knew they were descending into the heart of the tower. Their quarters were simple and functional, with everything they would require to satisfy their basic needs.
but little else. Delphi left, explaining that the Tau stationed outside their quarters would be their guide for the duration of their stay. PALMARTIS knew that guide really meant guard, and that they would see only what Aeon Tolkor Kiana wished them to. The following morning, PALMARTIS rose early and, along with Talos and the Tau escort, began the exploration of the city. Talos was like a caged Catachan devil, unable to mask his impatience despite PALMARTIS's remonstrations. He wished the Space Marine captain would cease his impolite display, but knew better than to openly manifest his displeasure. He was aware that they must be under surveillance, and it would not do to show division or disagreement. As the sun rose, bright and glaring, he was glad of the dermal protection unguents he had applied. Boarding one of the silver-grey trains he had seen yesterday, they were carried smoothly along the powered rail into the air, the ground many thousands of feet below. The buildings which PALMARTIS saw were constructed from a variety of smooth materials, seamless white stone panels, gleaming metal columns, gracefully curved glass sheets and transparent light blocks. Each was sparingly detailed and occasionally adorned with Tau symbology, which the Xenolexicon servitors were even now trying to decipher. There was an elegant simplicity to the architectural style. No single building attempted to outdo another in its splendour, and each was designed to fit stylistically with its neighbour. The grav train gradually began to descend, looping downwards through the lower levels of the city. Here the buildings were plainer, more simply designed and smaller than those in the centre of the city. Glittering arcades and geodasic domes passed by, the Tau inhabitants becoming more distinct as their journey took them outwards towards a vast, silver-sheathed dome at the edge of the city. "Where are we going?" PALMARTIS asked the accompanying Tau guard. The Tau turned his featureless helmet towards PALMARTIS and pointed to the huge structure ahead. "The Battle Dome, to see the warriors of the Fire Caste training. It should be quite interesting, especially for your Captain Talos." The Space Marine grunted and nodded. "It is always good to know how the enemy fights." "We are not your enemy, Captain," replied the Tau. "And when you see our fire warriors, you will not desire us for one." "I am a soldier," snapped Talos. "I fight where my Emperor demands, and if it is his will that we be enemies, then it shall be so. Desire does not enter into it." "What I am sure the captain means," said PALMARTIS hurriedly, "is that a man seldom desires enemies, but ultimately has little control over his destiny. It is our fervent wish that we do not become enemies." The alien seemed to accept this, and turned away as the grav train passed through an opening in the skin of the battle dome. The sheer scale of the dome's interior took PALMARTIS's breath away. The ceiling swept high above them, held aloft by unknown means, as there were no supporting columns visible. What little he understood regarding construction told PALMARTIS that such a huge structure should not be able to stand. The dome was split into arenas of various sizes, each modelled to represent a different theatre of war. There were jungle arenas, urban arenas, desert arenas, water-filled arenas, and all manner of others spread throughout the dome's floor. The grav train slid to a halt over a large arena filled with prefabricated buildings, mining equipment, and several armoured vehicles. The analogy was not lost on PALMARTIS. This was a small-scale recreation of the Nimbosa colony, and while the mocked-up vehicles were crude, the resemblance to imperial patterns was unmistakable. Advancing through the colony were several bulky figures, fire warriors armoured in heavy battle suits. Each warrior carried a fearsome-looking weapon, and was also armed with a second, shoulder-mounted gun. Before them, 2 squads of lighter armoured fire warriors darted through the colony, firing from cover in support of one another.
One of the mock-ups of an Imperial tank rumbled forwards, weapons firing and forcing the troops in the vanguard into cover. As one, the weapons of the heavy battlesuits locked onto the tank and fired, blowing it apart in a spectacular explosion and blasting the turret high into the air. The mock colony was swiftly taken, and the grav train moved off again. For the next 2 hours, PALMARTIS and Talos were shown Tau fire warriors training in a variety of different war zones and employing all manner of exotic weaponry, vehicles and war gear. By the time they emerged once more into the daylight, PALMARTIS could see that Talos had a newfound respect for the Tau way of war. As the grav train began climbing high into the center of the city once again, the Tau guide removed his helmet and laid it beside him. His face bore the same typically flat features of the Tau, but in the center of his forehead was a diamond-shaped ridge of raised bone. Lustrous dark hair spilled from the top of his head in an elaborately jeweled scalp lock, and his narrow eyes were twin slits of black. The alien fixed his gaze on PALMARTIS and said, "You have seen what my warriors can do, Raphael. Can you not see the foolishness of your continued resistance to our colonists on Nimbosa? I respect your people. They are brave and have done all that honor demands, but they cannot stand against us. You came here to begin protracted negotiations in order to delay our attack and allow your own forces time to reach Nimbosa. That will not happen. The Corps bring me word that your vessels are many months away and Nimbosa will be ours long before that." Captain Talos began to speak, but PALMARTIS smoothly interrupted, saying, "I presume that you are Aeonor Talcor Kiana." "I have that honor, yes," nodded the Tau Ethereal. "Then you should know that when our ships arrive at Nimbosa, we will fight you. The Emperor does not give up worlds his servants have claimed in his name." "You are a wise man, Raphael PALMARTIS, and despite his modest words, I know that your military advisor here is no ordinary soldier. You should both go back to your Emperor and tell him what you have seen here. Tell him of all the people that will die in his name and ask him if it is worth such a price to stand in our way." "We will fight you, alien," snarled Captain Talos. "To the last drop of blood, we will fight you." "I know," replied the Tau sadly, and turned away. How good is that? How good is that? I think I mentioned in a previous video recently, like, it's these little one-off little things that really, they give you the taste of the universe. It's like world building, you know, it's so good. And the early stuff, I don't know whether they still do it. They still do it, I guess, but the sort of 2000 to 2010 era of 40k was really just packed full of these little tiny little short story things. Amazing stuff. I love them. I know you still get them, but like, I don't know, that era to me, I mean, that was my era, obviously, when I was like, 15 or younger, I should say. The 2000 to 2010 sort of era, it just felt so right, even actually probably 2000 to 2005, I would say personally. But, you crack open those old books, they're just full of lore, full of little short stories like this that really, they set the mood, they really get you in the universe and these little visions of events occurring. It's good stuff. And this was one, and again, this is from the first Tau Codex, so all of this was brand new, and it was just so cool to see, and it was so cool to see the Imperium even entering into negotiations with a Xenos race. It's kind of stuff we'd never really seen much of. I mean, maybe there'd been a bit of stuff of Eldar, but like everybody else was just, they're just the enemy completely, Orks, Tyranids, whatnot. It's so interesting, and this has always stuck with me. It's got a really cool piece of artwork. I'd love to put it up on the screen, and if I can find it when I put this video out, I'll put it up there. If not, I'll try and I'll probably put a picture up here on the community page, because it's like an amazing pencil piece of artwork that I've never seen anywhere else. It's such a shame it's not available, because you can see the Space Marine and the diplomat speaking with the Tau guy. A beautiful piece of work, but yeah, my scanner's broke, so I can't do anything about that. Sorry, but trust me, I'll put it up on my community page. You'll like it. So I'll take a picture of it on my phone. But yeah, amazing piece of art. It's stuck with me, this story, as forever. Don't know who wrote it. Very good, though. Excellent stuff. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Be back again. This is just a smaller one. I'm working on several big videos at the minute. We're at the end of February 2024 now. So if you're watching in the future, this will make sense, I guess. Anyway, in March 2024, I've got a bunch of big videos coming out. I'm still working on them. I'm just putting out a couple of small things in between. Yeah, hope you like this. Thanks to everybody supporting the channel. Your names are on there here. And for those of you super chat and stuff regularly, I'll try and add you in if I remember, sorry. But otherwise, thank you all ever so much for your generosity. And if you could please give the video a like and let me know in the comments what you think. I'll really appreciate that. But I'll be back again very, very soon with much more stuff. Thank you all. May the Emperor protect. Ta-ra. Bye-bye.
The battle for Purgatory. Any sign of them yet, Sergeant? Captain Vaughan's voice crackled over the communicator. Sergeant Cern scoured the ragged, windswept terrain for what seemed like the 100th time, before raising the handheld unit to his mouth. Nothing yet, sir. We got the whole of this sector under surveillance, but there's nothing showing up anyway. All right. Keep me informed of any developments. Vaughan out. The communicator crackled into silence. A gust of chill wind whipped across the rocky plain. Cern shivered. Whether it was the biting wind that made him do it, or a deeper sense of foreboding he did not like to admit. Ever since Purgatory had been reclaimed from the Imperium from the low-tech frontier state into which it had fallen, a small force of Cadian shock troops had been posted on the planet. The Imperial Guardsmen were to support the inexperienced and poorly equipped Purgatory militia. Based at the only spaceport on the planet, the Cadians undertook regular patrols to the outlying human settlements in the unforgiving wilderness. Purgatory was a cold, unwelcoming world, much of its surface covered by dark, brooding forests, ice-capped mountain ranges, and bleak plains ravaged by high winds and regular hurricanes. As a result, the native Purgatorians lived within tightly constructed, isolated settlements of sturdy, ground-hugging dwellings. Buildings over 2 stories were few and far between. The inhabitants of the isolated settlements subsisted by mining base metal ores from the bedrock of the planet and scratching a living from the nutrient-weak topsoil, while the planetary militia defended the labourers from the indigenous mammalian carnivores with their primitive shotguns and crossbows. Cern had hated Purgatory as soon as he set eye on it from the dropship's windows. A grey, unwelcoming place populated by grey, unwelcoming people. That had been 18 months ago, and the passage of time had done nothing to improve its appeal. A dust devil skittered across the ridge, grey ash dancing in the eddies of the tiny vortex. The wind tugged at the guardsman's clothes, as if searching for a way in, as an invading army might hunt out a weak point in their enemy's defences. Sergeant Cern turned his gaze away from the monotony of the landscape for a moment and glanced at the ragtag collection of men that made up the patrol. They were mainly the part-time members of the militia, who worked in Purgatory's mines when not on their tour of duty. The poorly armed and even more poorly armoured Purgatorians did not come up to the Cadian sergeant's standards for soldiery, not by a long way. They were all either scrawny and unhealthy specimens or overweight and already past their prime. The worst threat they had ever had to face up to was an enraged tribe of the indigenous primitive humanoid population. Apart from himself, the only other guardsman among the party was Kratz and Dulst, both seasoned fighters who had served under him on several campaigns across the eastern fringes of the Imperium. Each of them had seen their share of death and destruction, And yet here, on this blighted world, without having been involved in proper armed conflict for over a year, the troopers felt an almost perverse thrill at the possibility of invaders having landed on Purgatory. The endless waiting and sentry duties had begun to make them all feel uneasy, afraid that they might be losing the edge to their finely honed skills. Training and target practice were no substitute for the brutal learning experience of war. Nothing honed a soldier's reflexes like the adrenaline-charged moment in the thick of battle when you charged an Ork bunker or stood up to a slavering Tyranid horde. You either learned, and learned fast, or you didn't see another sunrise to make the same mistake again. So as soon as reports had started to come in from other outposts on the planet of attacks by rampaging bloodthirsty troops wearing an archaic design of power armour, accompanied by snarling monsters, while many of the native populace were overcome by panic and broke down into a state of hysteria, the Cadians were filled with a morbid exhilaration. The mining fort had immediately been put on full battle alert, and patrols were sent out to report on the advance of the Chaos Warband. A loud explosion, only a few meters away, took Cern from his reverie. Rock and dirt showered outwards from the point of impact, throwing one of the militiamen backwards from the ridge, his face and chest reduced to a bloody ruin by the shell which had detonated just in front of him. Sergeant Cern narrowed his eyes and swiftly scanned the boulder-dotted plain, and then, where before there had been nothing but the barren, rocky wilderness, there were suddenly several dark-armoured figures striding purposefully across the grey plain. "Get down and return fire!" yelled the trooper sergeant. Kratz and Dolst responded to their sergeant's command instantly, while it took the shocked militiamen several precious seconds to react, and then they did so more out of fear and surprise, rather than because they were following orders. The Cadians fired blast after blast from their lasguns at the assailants. It was as if they had just appeared out of nowhere. At first, the figures looked to Cern like Space Marines, possibly of the Dark Angels chapter, or members of the Blood Angels' infamous Death Company. But as the Space Marines continued their advance, he quickly recognized the enemy for what they really were. Curling horns and cruel spikes adorned the warriors' helmets and ceramite shoulder pads. However, some of the attackers' suits seemed less flexible in their design, constructed from riveted plasteel plates. Images of death and chaos emblems covered the pitted and age-corroded power armour, along with graffitied curses and battle cries, while dead human eyes stared out from the withered heads hung on chains from the Marines' belts. The winged skull crests marked these particular individuals as Night Lord Chaos Space Marines, the foul progeny of the Night Haunter himself. The Cadians' homeworld was the first line of defence for the Imperium against the tide of chaos which flowed from the Eye of Terror. The Imperial Guardsmen, recruited from Cadia, were all too familiar with the Chaos Space Marines. Due to the Traitor Legion's frequent forays to the planet's surface, the shock troopers had already fought enemies such as the Night Lords on countless occasions. Mankind's representatives on Purgatory, however, had so far remained free from the attentions of the minions of chaos, isolated and cut off as the planet had been for so many millennia. Cern swallowed hard. The sudden emergence of the Night Lords from the seemingly featureless landscape suggested a knowledge of infiltration and deployment built up over numerous conflicts. That, and the loose formation in which they now approached, and the fact that they were the first to contact the fort's defences, screamed a warning through the sergeant's consciousness. These were not ordinary Chaos Space Marines. They were hard-bidden veterans from the time of the Horus Heresy itself. Cern had faced the might of the Dark Gods of Chaos once before, and lived. But then it had been as part of a regiment of Imperial Guardsmen, now with only 2 troopers, and a handful of poorly trained miners under his command, and no heavy weapons support. He did not rate the patrol's chances of survival. The frontiersman's weapons were proving ineffective, against the solid armour of the veterans. Shotgun shells ricocheted from the plasteel plates or disintegrated harmlessly on impact. At best, the bolts from the militia's crossbows penetrated only a few centimetres into the toughened ceramite. The Cadian sergeant picked up his communicator. There was a click as something metallic landed among the stones behind him. There was a short, piercing burst of white noise, and the communicator overloaded in a shower of sparks as the looted haywire grenade took effect. Hearing a high-pitched hissing to his right, the sergeant spun round, anxiously, certain that he knew what was coming next. Just as he had suspected, the hiss suddenly became an angry, roaring blast, as the air was heated around them, and in a matter of seconds, Guardsman Kratz became a dried husk as a blast from a Night Lord's melter gun evaporated all the moisture from his body, which then exploded in a burst of dust and calcified remains. The Night Lords were almost on them now, the patrol's weapons doing little to keep them at bay. Had the Chaos Space Marines not infiltrated their position to such an extent, at least the patrol might have had a chance to make it back to the fort. But now flight was impossible. The only option was to fight it out. Sergeant Cern pinpointed a barbaric warrior who had 3 head trophies swinging from his spiked suit, and sighted along his bolt pistol. Squeezing the trigger, he fired off several shots directly at the Marine's helmet. Over the sound of gunfire from both sides, Cern thought he heard a roar of pain, and he saw his target jerk backwards. Regaining his balance, the veteran raised his head, and the Cadian saw the shattered stump of a demonic horn and exposed, shredded tissue through the hole torn in the side of the helmet. Cern watched as the Chaos Space Marine raised an ornate bolter to fire and then, inexplicably, found himself thrown to the ground on the other side of the ridge. It took several seconds for his nervous system to register what had happened. The first thing that told him something was wrong was the sight of his ragged arm lying several meters away. Then suddenly, sickening awareness flooded his consciousness as he felt hot blood pumping from the ragged stump of his shoulder with every adrenaline-quickened heartbeat. Pain engulfed him in a cold wave, and he felt his stomach heave. Seeing their commanding officer fatally wounded, several of the frontiersmen lost the will to keep fighting in the face of such overwhelming odds. Dropping their useless weapons, they got to their feet, waving their arms in surrender. The Cadian troopers watched in helpless dismay as each and every one of the men was cut down in a hail of autocannon fire. The remaining miners turned to run and came face to face with more of the death-dealing, chaos-cursed warriors. The second squad of Night Lord's veterans had already infiltrated the patrol's position from behind. Who knew how long the callous killers had been waiting before they entered the fray? They had probably held off until they felt they would gain the most pleasure from the experience, cutting down the doomed frontiersmen as they made their futile attempt at escape. No doubt they savoured every death spasm of the victims, relished every expression of utter despair on the dying men's faces. These were not the brave and honourable heroes like the veterans of the loyal Imperial chapters. The Night Lords had no qualms about gunning down innocents or those weaker than themselves. They had their own set of values. A riveted boot crunched down on top of the ridge, and a black-armoured figure stood over Sergeant Cern, gazing down malevolently from inside the hellish visage of his helmet. The one remaining horn making it appear lopsided and unbalanced. Fear suppressing the pain, racking his body, Cern shuffled over the dusty ground, dragging himself towards his severed arm and the bolt pistol still in its grip. The veteran watched as the guardsman tried pitifully to pull the weapon free of his dead hand, his fingers slipping on the blood-slicked butt. "You should pray for death, Imperial dog," the warrior growled, and then laughed, his mirth manifest as a cruel and guttural sound. Having savoured the moment, the Chaos Space Marine tired of the spectacle. Raising his bolter, the Night Lord fired. veteran brother Nadrak strode among the carnage. Where he thought he still saw a flicker of movement, he fired off several rattling shots from his chain-fed autocannon. This was the point of the long war. It was not to wage some galaxy-spanning, bloody crusade for the dark gods, like those feeble-minded berserkers loyal to the blood god, but to kill and revel in the killing, and, giving the Imperium a taste of the Night Lord's ruthless methods, only served to provide even greater satisfaction. But this was only the beginning. The Night Lords had not finished with this pathetic world and all that it had to offer them. And once they were done, not a single soul would remain alive on the planet. Those who resisted their will, or those who were not fit for the slave labour camps, would die, and the Night Lords would relish their dying. Soon this inhospitable world would seem to its inhabitants to have been paradise, as they learnt of the horrors of the warp. Hell had come to purgatory. Noise Marine. The Leman Russ battle tank rumbled along the pass, its tracks squealing in protest as the vehicle was driven at speed over the rocky terrain. The steep sides of the gorge rose up menacingly on either side, the black, volcanic walls leaving the pass in permanent shadow. Behind the battle tank came a short column of Imperial chimeras, the armoured troop carriers multi-lasers swivelling to cover the sides of the pass in case of enemy attack. Inside the Leman Russ, Tank Commander Rossman stared through the vehicle's sights at the boulder-strewn wilderness ahead of him. His mind was only partially concentrating on the journey, being mainly occupied with thoughts of the Chaos Force's attack on the fort. There were many such isolated outposts, and the fort had been built by the frontiersmen of the planet to protect a series of mine workings from the attentions of the local predatory fauna and belligerent primitive tribesmen. But why should the place so interest a traitor legion, such as the Night Lords? Was it just another example of the mindless destruction and wanton havoc-wreaking that so characterized the Chaos Space Marines? Or did the twisted brethren of the Adeptus Astartes have a yet more sinister purpose beyond that of putting another defenseless world to the sword for their foul gods? As soon as the Imperial Guard headquarters on Purgatory had received the report of the imminent attack on the fort and the request for reinforcements, Colonel Drax had immediately dispatched the tank unit under Rossman's command. Rossman had led numerous assaults on the enemies of the Imperium across the star system of the Ultima Segmentum, from breaking a siege laid by marauding Orks or relieving a planetary defense force from an Eldar attack. But Chaos Space Marines were something else. Rightly, they were held in a position of fear and awe by the soldiers of the Imperial Guard. These damned warriors had defied the Emperor for centuries, gaining invaluable experience in war through 1,000 confrontations. Not only that, but they marched into battle alongside the grotesque denizens of warp space, creatures with flesh of living metal and blood of liquid fire. Yea, even though thou pass through the valley of the shadow of death, Rossman found himself muttering aloud. "Pardon, sir?" asked the las cannon gunner, seated beneath him in the cramped belly of the tank. "What? No. It's just a saying I remember someone telling me from old Earth, Trooper," Rossman explained. "How far now?" he continued, trying to put the thoughts of demons out of his head. 13 clicks, sir," the guardsman replied, checking the instruments in front of him. "Estimated time of arrival?" 11 minutes, sir." The battle tank was suddenly shaken by a deep, rumbling blast as a weapon was fired into the pass. Looking through the sights, Rossman saw a section of the gully wall to the right erupt. Much of that part of the gorge wall proceeded to give way, chunks of rock as big as the Leman Russ tumbling down into the pass, partially blocking the reinforcements' route. A second blast, like a thrumming boom, rocked the tank, and over the comlink, Rossman heard a cry of anguish from one of the other vehicles. The tank commander scanned the sides of the pass through the tank's sights, but could see nothing. Simultaneously, The cliff face behind the tank crumbled, separating the Leman Russ from the rest of the cavalcade. "What's going on?" he shouted to his crew. "Chimera 2's multi-laser has been hit, sir," a bolter gunner reported from his station. "By what?" I can't tell, sir. Looks like it was some kind of heavy weapon." "All crew on standby," Rossman ordered. "If you see anything, fire at will." The back of the second Chimera dropped open and the armoured vehicle disgorged its cargo of Cadian troopers amid a cloud of oily smoke. The shot that had knocked out the troop carrier's multilaser had resulted in a flashback that caused a secondary explosion inside the vehicle. Clear of the choking smoke, the guardsmen immediately set about taking up positions around the pass. Trooper Lyle darted over the gravelly floor of the gorge, keeping his body low as he ran, then joined two of his fellows behind the great boulder they were using as cover while they tried to pinpoint the exact position of their attackers. Then they saw them. Space Marines in brilliantly painted power armour, standing on the lip of the gorge. The striking contrasts of colours and bizarre patterns daubed on their suits, making them all too obvious against the grey skyline. These could only be Noise Marines, Chaos Space Marines who had dedicated themselves to the worship of the sensual Lord of Pleasure. Where the power armour of the Emperor's loyal Space Marines was a pure, uniform hue, the chaos-distorted ceramite and plasteel plates of the Noise Marines were daubed in a mind-wrenching spectrum of colours. Spots and jagged stripes clashed with fluorescent streaks and bright swirls of colour. Such perverse contrasts and use of colour was enough to turn a sane man's mind. It all indicated the extreme forms of stimuli the pleasure-numbed senses of Slanesh's chosen required to gain any emotional response from an experience. Intensely heightened hearing combined with centuries of sensual abuse had left a permanent scar on the psyche of all Noise Marines. It only took a second for Lyle to register all of this, which was all the time it took for the Noise Marines to pick their targets. The guardsman's ears were suddenly assailed by a cacophonous wailing that rose and fell in pitch with jarring abruptness. Harmonics formed within the metallic scream, and the trooper grimaced in pain as the noise increased in volume. The ground was now vibrating in resonance with the sonic roar. In showers of crimson sparks or rupturing explosions of white-hot metal shards, the weapon systems of several of the other troop carriers were destroyed under the Noise Marines' barrage. Lyle watched as a squad of shock troops, previously pressed up against the side of the first stricken Chimera, moved out to engage the enemy on the battlefield. At once they were cut down by the screeching howls from the Noise Marines' sonic blasters. Waves of torturous sound, ruptured organs, snapped bones, and ripped the guardsmen's bodies apart. A deep, resonating bass note assailed Lyle's ears, and he was sure that the noise would deafen him. From where he stood, with his hands pressed over his ears to try and block out the banshee wails of the ambushers, the Cadian saw that several of his fellow troopers had wheeled out an autocannon from a motionless Chimera. Before they even had a chance to use the gun, the Noise Marines were firing on them again. Lyle watched in horror, unable to tear his eyes away as the barrel buckled and the cannon exploded in an impressive display of pyrotechnics. Burning wreckage and charred flesh rained down onto the floor of the pass. Guardsmen desperately looked for the Leman Russ battle tank that had been leading this column of reinforcements. But it was trapped too, and under attack from yet more of the brightly painted warriors wielding heavy, long-necked weapons. And then he was screaming himself through clenched teeth, trying to drown out the sound throbbing inside his skull. The crack like a thunderclap. The huge boulder shattered, lacerated by jagged splinters of stone. The Cadian stumbled backwards, no longer afforded any protection against the Noise Marines' sonic weapons. The agonizing frequencies of the blast master sent conflicting signals spiraling through his nervous system, throwing the guardsman into a fit of thrashing spasms. Lyle felt one eye, and then another, burst inside his head. before he was granted merciful release as his body exploded in a red spray that drenched the surrounding rocks. Inside the battle tank, Commander Rossman heard the thrumming bass note building in intensity. He took in the scene of carnage through the site's monitors as his crew vainly attempted to repel the attackers. The Noise Marines were standing among the blazing wreckage and splintered remains of Cadian bodies. There were no signs of life from any of the troopers. Several figures, their armour painted in distorted camouflage patterns of orange and purple, were approaching the tank over the rubble of the landslide, huge destructive weapons in their hands. There was a sudden, resounding boom, and the stranded tank was shaken by a shockwave of incredible force, throwing the men stuck inside around the cabin. Over a long distance, the sonic weapons of the Noise Marines would have had little effect against a plasteel hull, but at short range, the impact was like the punch of an anti-tank shell. Gears ground painfully as the gunner tried to rotate the turret, suggesting that something essential would buckle if he continued to do so. "Damage report!" Rossman shouted over the discordant crescendo of the Noise Marines' assault, and the chugging fire of the tank's heavy bolter sponsons. "Those cannons out!" yelled back a crewman, blood pouring from a gash on his forehead. "And the turret's jammed! We can only fire forwards!" "And Slaanesh curs are behind us, and to the sides," Rossman hissed under his breath. Howling in ecstasy, their screams of wild abandon reverberating through arrays of strange tubing attached to their helmets. The Noise Marines bombarded the battle tank with another round of ear-splinting pulses of sound from their blast masters. Rivets popped free and ricocheted around the interior of the armoured vehicle, inflicting yet more injuries on its occupants. Whipping free of the Leman Russ, strips of track flew off through the air. A heavy bolter exploded before the concussive waves, its ammunition detonating inside the chamber, just as the vehicle's drive shaft fractured. As the great adamantium rod smashed through motor systems and drive mechanisms, the tank was flipped over completely, crashing back down to earth on its crushed turret. A great whoop of perverse pleasure went up from the Noise Marine Blastmaster squad, now surrounding the overturned tank. Under such direct attack, and with one burst from their mighty weapons after another, the Leman Russ was weakening. The sustained shots sent hatches and gun casings flying until the tremendous stresses were too much for even the battle tank's sturdy chassis. Metal warped, armour fractured, and the hull of the battle tank was breached by the sonic barrage. A few guardsmen, blood gushing from ears, noses and eyes, staggered out of the wreck before falling to the ground unconscious as their brains turned to jelly under the atonal assault. Slaanesh's Noise Marines celebrated their crowning achievement in one last, mighty, clashing cadence from their battery of sonic weapons. Their screams of exultation, melding with the discordant roar into one agonizing cacophony of destructive sound. The Lord of Pleasure had rewarded their loyalty with the death of the Imperial Guard's greatest weapon. There would be no reinforcements to relieve the fort. The humans holed up there would have to fight off the hordes of chaos unaided, or suffer eternal damnation. Precinct 40K. He hasn't got a name, so I've just called it this. "Secure the doors!" yelled the Marshal, bursting in through the armory's entrance. The bewildered guard looked at the officer dumbly. "Do it now!" he screamed at the man, his exasperation visible behind his sinister black visor. "What's going on?" spluttered the guard, punching the code to seal the armory into a terminal. "Genestealer insurrection," panted the Marshal. An explosion shook the building, sending several guards reeling as they ran for the gun stores. Marshal Bannon hugged his weapon to himself. Although the Red Nar Planetary Defense Force was well equipped, he was prepared for the worst. The cult had surfaced as if from nowhere, Clans of Genestealer hybrids from all over the metropolis had gathered together and were striking at major information and resource distribution centres. "They've already got some weapons," continued Bannon. "Basic handguns and grenades, but they'll need heavier equipment to take the planet. Without that, their insurrection will fail." The judge strode up to the marshal, his ancient robes flowing about his imposing frame, and a cold, piercing look in his eyes. Despite the tremors rocking the armory, Bannon stood to attention. Everyone respected Judge Klein, more out of fear than anything else. He was one of the leading figures in the Adeptus Arbites on Radnar, and head of its operations within the metropolis. "Terrorist Genestealer attack, sir," Bannon responded instantly. "The insurrectionists are armed with auto pistols, las pistols, and hand flamers. They're also carrying frag grenades, and are believed to have a number of heavier weapons." "I see," said Judge Klein, quietly. "There are also rumours that they've already taken the comm station. It's a state of panic out there." "I knew nothing of any cult activities in this city," said the judge, with barely contained anger. "I thought they had all been dealt with last year, during the Brood uprising." "We thought they had been suppressed, sir." "You thought?" Klein glowered at Bannon. "What is our duty, Marshal? To hold the law on the Emperor's behalf, sir. And allowing this insurrection to take place, is that upholding the law?" "No, sir." "Is that following the Emperor's will?" "No, sir." Bannon could not take much more of this humiliation. It was impossible to uncover every plot and scheme against the Imperium within the metropolises of Radnar. "Would you see the Imperium fall to these abhorrent deviants?" "No, sir." Klein took a deep breath. "Are the doors secure?" "Yes, sir." "And the men armed?" "Yes, sir." "Then let us pray that the doors are not breached." On the other side of the sealed doors, those members of the Planetary Defence Force unlucky enough to be shut out of the armory stood their ground bravely against the cult's assault. Arbitrator Vaughn braced himself against the heavy recoil from his shotgun. There was no question of the guards fleeing. The men selected to enforce the Emperor's law within the Imperium were devoted to upholding that government. Fanatically loyal warriors of justice who maintained order for their god-ruler upon his many worlds. The arbitrator pumped one round after another into the milling cultists and was rewarded by seeing two being blasted back down the armory steps in gouts of blood. The sight of them revolted Vaughn. Their grotesque appearance was a blasphemy against the Emperor's truth. All manner of disgusting alien-human hybrids swam through the scrofulous waves of the mob. Some of the vile creatures looked like pure strain gene-stealers, six-limbed monstrosities, armed only with the slicing claws and talons granted them by their foul evolution. Others looked almost like men, tending only towards heavy bone structure and boldness. Still more were somewhere between the two extremities with free arms, huge claws, and bestial features. Even the blue coloration of the gene-stealers' chitinous hides nauseated the arbitrator compared to the pure tones of human flesh. The aliens were repellent, unholy mutants that threatened the Emperor's government and had to be purged from every world in which they were encountered. But what disgusted Vaughn and his fellow Arbites the most were the Brood brothers, apparently normal humans who had been implanted by the gene-stealers, acting as hosts for their hybrid offspring. The hatred he reserved for such dissenters was only paralleled by his sense of duty and unswerving loyalty to the Emperor. Vaughn swung his weapon round as a gene-stealer, its four-clawed arms flailing, threw itself up the steps at him. He locked a special executioner shell onto its heat sign and let fly, his shotgun bucking violently as the tiny missile roared forth. The creature dodged with preternatural speed, but the shell twisted after it and crashed into its chitinous hide, tearing apart the creature's body in an eruption of purple ichor. Driven by the Brood's Gestalt consciousness, the hybrids and Brood brothers ceaselessly attempted to force their way up the steps to the armory doors. Why did they keep trying to get to the doors, Vaughn wondered, even if they got past the defending arbitrators, which they would not. He persisted in telling himself. The seals were now secure. There was no way in or out until one of the officers inside released the opening mechanism. Another guard close by collapsed as his midriff was torn open by a gene-stealer's blooded talons, and Vaughn turned his attention back to the battle for the armory. The heavily muscled form of the Patriarch prowled after its brood, its grotesque tongue slobbering over its lips. It had been many generations since the gene-stealer had infected the first of its brood, implanting its genetic material into the hapless humans. From that moment on, the Patriarch alone controlled the brood web's thoughts and actions, holding their wills in a grip of steel. Through its human thralls, the Patriarch had been able to understand human society, and thereby insidiously work against it, planting its agents and infected brood brothers within the highest echelons of society, subtly building up its power base. The cult had to be firmly established and well organised, or the sudden gene-stealer uprising would fail. After long years of scheming and waiting, the cult were ready to take Radnar for their own, with the Patriarch as ruler over them all. Safe, beyond the front line of the fighting, the gene-stealer Magus, its eyes glowing with eldritch light, probed the minds of the soldiers inside the armory. Tendrils of psychic power slivered through the ether, until they found what the Psyker was searching for and latched on to the already primed subject. Judge Klein suddenly stopped, looking about him in bewilderment, as if unsure where he was or what he was doing. From his post at the door terminal, Bannon noticed his superior's dazed expression. "Are you all right, sir?" "What?" Klein stared at Bannon, his brow furrowed, as if he did not recognize the marshal. "Are you feeling all right, Judge Klein?" The judge seemed to come to his senses, and ignoring Bannon's question, ordered, "Open the doors." "You want to open the—" Without warning, Klein leapt at Bannon, snarling, knocking him off his feet and pinning him to the ground. A vicious blow to the side of the marshal's head left him briefly stunned. Klein calmly got to his feet again, but kept one foot pressed firmly on the wrist of Bannon's gun arm. "Why do you not welcome the coming of our Lord?" the judge said, as if only half addressing Bannon. "We are most blessed to receive his personal attentions. The Patriarch is our God and Master, and deserves our worship and total devotion. We would gladly die for him." Judge Klein was in a state of rapture, and was unconsciously, slowly releasing the pressure on Bannon's arm. "I have looked upon the face of God. His time has come. His prophet waits outside with the rest of our beloved brothers. Now I merely have to open the doors and welcome the Magus in." Bannon looked at the judge in horror. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, but it only took him a second to make his decision. He pulled his arm free of Klein's boot. "I can't let you do that, sir," he said, sitting upright and unsteadily raising his gun. "You're too late, unbeliever. Our God is here." In one swift movement, Klein brought his own bolt pistol up to Bannon's forehead and fired. The marshal's body jerked backwards grotesquely. Before the impact, and without a moment's hesitation, Judge Klein turned to the access terminal and tapped in the door's release code. With a hiss of hydraulic gas and a dull whirring, the armory doors slid apart. Instantly, the press of the brood forced its way into the building, the few remaining guards falling before them, overcome by the sheer weight of the throng. Judge Klein smiled contentedly, having done what was required of him by his foul god. With the armory taken, and most importantly the arsenal held inside it, the rest of the metropolis would soon follow. Following the cultists into the armory, the gene-stealer Patriarch gurgled with pleasure. Radnar was his. His children would sweep across the face of the planet, converting all to the cult's cause. Far off in the freezing void, beyond the edge of Radnar's star system, the vast bioships drifted onwards in silence. Their destination was pinpointed by the psychic signal unwittingly sent out by the Patriarch's brood. It would not be long before the Hive fleet reached the newly taken planet and its fresh feeding grounds. The Fall of Purgatory. Lieutenant KRUGER looked down from the wall of the fort and knew what real fear was. The plain before the outpost was dark with troops, as well as the blue-black warriors of the Night Lord's Legion. Among the advancing horde, the lieutenant could see Khorne berserkers wearing armor the color of spilt blood. The Chaos Horde shifted and growled in anticipation. Brazen juggernauts bellowed over the chants of Khorne berserkers, mingled with the yells and battle cries of the Night Lords. The sounds inside the frontier mining outpost and fort contrasted dramatically with the snarls and roars of the Chaos Warband. Behind him, the lieutenant could hear nothing but the crying of the women and children as they huddled together in fear, awaiting the inevitable. They had all heard tales, half-forgotten myths about the fate of those who were not fortunate enough to die straight away at the hands of the Dark God's minions. There must be hundreds of them out there, Lieutenant KRUGER thought to himself. Certainly far more than the fort's contingent of troops could be expected to take on alone. But at least there were reinforcements on the way. However, until they arrived, it was up to the militiamen and miners of the outpost, along with squads of Cadians, to defend the position. The whoosh of the Cadians' missile launcher greeted the start of the Night Lord's attack. KRUGER watched as, one after another, the frag missiles found their mark. Despite each burst of shrapnel, the missiles seemed to be having little effect on the heavily armoured Chaos Space Marines. The lieutenant knew that eventually the soldiers inside the fort would have to confront the warp-cursed warriors at close quarters. "Blood for the Blood God! Skulls for the Skull Throne! Blood for the Blood God!" was the constant chant of the berserkers, their harsh, guttural voices sounding anything but human. The frontiersmen stood in tense anticipation behind the walls of the fort, which shook with every impact from the Night Lord's ancient plasma guns and las cannons. KRUGER looked around him. Militiamen cowered behind hastily constructed or reinforced defences. An old, disused fuel tank had been dragged up against the gates to form a barricade, but he doubted that it would make much difference against the ferocity of the frenzied berserkers. A solidly constructed, cage-like vehicle had been brought up to the front line by the enemy, and a group of Night Lords were in the process of releasing something from it. As the stimulants coursed through the wasted body of the Chaos Space Marine incarcerated inside its adamantium sarcophagus, the dreadnought steamed out of its cage, free of the chains at last. All humanity gone, its mind destroyed by madness, loathing, and animalistic anger at its imprisonment inside the robot body. The dreadnought was like a ravening beast driven by blind, psychotic rage. With clanking, earth-shaking footsteps, the chaos-ridden amalgam of flesh and forgotten technology stomped towards the siege lines, driven by a mindless feral instinct for killing rather than rational thought. The gates heaved under a succession of battering charges, and their bolted fixings tore free of the walls. In a hail of shattered masonry and twisted metal, something very big crashed into the battered fuel tank. A great metal-taloned mechanoid claw reached over the top of the disused container and seized it in a crushing grip. Hydraulic pistons wheezed in protest as the dreadnought raised the fuel tank off the ground, cruelly sharp digits tearing through the rusted metal, then tossed it aside into the mass of petrified people. At once, its archaic twin-heavy bolter rattled into action, sweeping the militiamen and their families with a sudden burst of devastating firepower. KRUGER saw a Cadian trooper boldly leap at the monstrous machine from one side, evading a sweep of its claw and reaping hail of its bolters, and try to sever the dreadnought's power cables with his lasgun's bayonet. The huge war machine grabbed the guardsman, and with one clench of its mighty adamantium talons, the Cadian was cut in two. The lieutenant turned away from the carnage he had just witnessed, feeling the contents of his stomach rising in his throat, only to see another of the brave guardsmen cut down by the obscenely large chain axe of a roaring berserker. The monomolecular teeth sliced through flak armour and flesh with equal ease, the whirring blade edge sending a spray of Cadian blood high in the air. Lieutenant KRUGER suddenly found himself in the midst of a struggle between frontiersmen, shock troopers, and bloodlusting Chaos Space Marines. The Khorne berserkers had entered the compound, and the huddle of defenders inside the gates were now surrounded. The ferocity of the frenzied warriors and their sheer skill in close combat could not be resisted. It was now only a matter of time. The housing of its heavy bolters glowing orange, the dreadnought ploughed into the throng of people, reaping the Purgatorians down to a mindless crimson harvest, regardless of age or gender. Eviscerated corpses were cast aside, in an unrelenting orgy of killing as several tons of man-slaying technology surged forward in a red flood. The carnage and bloodletting within the fort had become like a palpable essence, cloying the air with its sickly sweet smell, and above the noise of conflict, the incessant chant of the Khorne berserkers rang out over the battlefield. "Blood for the blood god! Blood for the blood god! Retreat! Get back to the core!" KRUGER barked the order, being followed immediately by all those on the battlements still able to run. Clutching a ragged wound in his arm, the lieutenant made his way back towards the last part of the fort that had not yet been overrun. The remaining missile launcher had been positioned there, and frontiersmen filled out the guardsmen's depleted ranks. Something strange and disturbing was beginning to happen inside the compound. Looking down from his secure vantage point, Lieutenant KRUGER was certain that he could see a red mist beginning to envelop the mass of fighting bodies below the battlements. It was as if the berserker's frenzied anger was finding physical form, as the scarlet cloud seemed to steam from the Chaos Warrior's armour. As he continued to watch in disbelieving horror, the tangled redness appeared to thicken, twisted shapes becoming visible within the cloud. And KRUGER knew with chilling certainty that Purgatory was damned. The sky had turned as red as the blood glistening on the berserkers' axe heads, and broiling storm clouds, tinged crimson, blotted out the sun. Everywhere he looked, the ground was red with spilt blood of the Night Lord's victims. But even among the Chaos Hordes, none could compare with the Khorne berserkers for the unparalleled number of frontiersmen and guardsmen who had fallen to their chain axes, and the savagery with which the slaughter had been executed. And then, KRUGER suddenly realized that the Chaos Space Marines were no longer fighting alone. Amidst the armoured fighters, there were now other creatures, skins red and scaly, long, muscular arms ending in murderous talons. The scent of battle had crossed from the material universe to the warp, its sickly smell calling Khorne's warriors of death to feast on mortal flesh. Glowing blades clutched in their clawed hands, the demons leapt upon the terrified frontiersmen with inhuman, blood-crazed shrieks. As KRUGER watched, transfixed by the monstrous horrors of the warp, he saw the red cloud coalescing in places, and then the demon children of the blood god melted out of the mist before his very eyes. All the abhorrent monsters of humanity's collective subconsciousness seemed to be materializing amongst the carnage, coagulating from the swirling red mist itself. Brass-collared hounds, each larger than a man, dragged the trapped militiamen from behind their barricades and sank knife-long fangs into pulsing throats. Deformed shapes ran shrieking through the defending forces, their jagged hell blades glowing with life-draining energy. Here a demon horror screamed through a gaping, fang-lined mouth in its stomach, where the ground writhed with half-formed human limbs. At a point enveloped by the emanations from the warp, a concrete wall had become like flesh, its rough surface rippling vilely. As another flesh hound tore a chunk from a Cadian guardsman's carcass. Close by a leering bloodletter clasped the head of a militiaman in its hands, licking the crimson fluid from it with a rasping tongue. Lieutenant Corder could stand no more. With one shouted command, he ordered the guardsmen beside him upon the roof of the fort to let fire with everything they had. Their comrades in the compound below were beyond saving now. If the Cadian troopers and frontiersmen fell to their own side's frag missiles, then Corder considered that he had rescued them from a fate worse than death. For all knew that physical death at the hands of the demons was not the end of it. A man's soul would remain for all eternity within the warp, held captive and tortured with no hope of release, at the foot of the Blood God's throne. Demons, Chaos Space Marines, Guardsmen, and Purgatorians were obliterated in a storm of frag missiles, plasma energy, and melter fire. For a moment, the Chaos advance was slowed, but where one of the Horde fell, 5 more were eager to take its place. The beginning of the end was upon the lieutenant's forces. Howling, Brother Sergeant Melkor of the Khorne Berserkers split another frontiersman in half with a savage blow from his chain axe. In his state of frenzy, he had lost count of the number of skulls he had taken for Khorne this day, but it could never be too many. The red mist was on him now. He could tell that the Blood God was well pleased with his champion for all that he had achieved as the raw power of the warp took on substance around him and his brother slayers. The energy of the warp swirled in eddies around them, and time writhed in agony as the birthing pangs of the Defender's nightmares commenced. Loathing for the Imperium and the need for revenge had festered for long eons in the timeless realm of chaos. Now it found expression in the fury of the Chaos Space Marines' assault on the stronghold. Minds and souls, focused on nothing but the act of killing, allowed the influence of the Blood God to extend its reach from the warp. Rage, hatred, and bloodlust crashed over the battlefield, beginning to congeal from the ether as grisly travesties of living creatures. The more blood the berserkers spilt, the greater the overlap between material and the immaterial became. This served only to fuel the warriors' desire for bloodshed and increase their terrible ferocity. In a rare moment of lucidity, Melkor, Khorne's avenger, took in more than just the butchered corpses of his next victim and was able to assess the warband's position. All around him, berserkers and night lords appeared to have the advantage, their archaic power armor drenched in the lifeblood of their enemies. In terms of sheer numbers and bestial savagery, the chaos-corrupted warriors had the upper hand. A well-aimed lasgun shot from a Cadian trooper exploded against Brother Malkor's chest, but did not even slow the berserker's charge. The guardsman's own flak armor did nothing to stop Malkor's spiteful, bloody-handed retaliation. With 4 fluid strokes, the Cadian was left as a limbless torso. The Khorne Berserker growled in cruel satisfaction. They would crush this pathetic world and claim its prize for their own. Then the upstart Emperor would know of their might and despair, and in the depths of his despair the Dark God's minions would have their revenge. Victory would be theirs, and the long war would come to an end. Malkor luxuriated in the slaughter of those around him, the reddening consuming his mind utterly. Then he felt the approach of something through the warp, mighty and terrible indeed, a concentration of sadistic cruelty and a bestial hunger for blood that only the most violent of massacres could attract and appease. Lured by the stench of battle, and the agonized death throes of the warrior's prey, it came. The berserker's leader welcomed the demon spirit across the divide of space and time, and it spoke to him of all that it would do to the glory of Khorne if the battle brother champion assented to his wishes. Only the spirit of a greater demon would make such a demand, and Malkor would not make such a sacrifice for anything less. With a thought, the pact was made. Instantly, a horrific transformation took hold of the Chaos Space Marine. The Berserker's body began to swell rapidly, fur-covered flesh bursting through the plasteel plates, ripping the armour apart. His arms were flung outwards by a powerful spasm and lengthened with an audible stretching sound. His whole body writhed and twisted as his skeleton and internal organs reorganized themselves from within. Black, bone-like stumps appeared from between his shoulder blades, growing at a grossly accelerated rate until a great pair of bat-like wings unfurled behind him, blotting out the weak light of the sun. Leg joints bent back painfully as the snout of an animal burst through the old skull of the Chaos Space Marine. And all the time, the warrior's body grew in size as the demon possessing it drew on the energy of the warp to fuel its transformation. The possession was complete. Malkor the Avenger was no more, and in the Berserker's place there now stood a gargantuan bloodthirster. The demon reached down to the battlements of the still defending central core of the fort. Men fled, screaming as their sanity cracked before the order of terror radiating from the demon's presence. The bloodthirster picked up the Cadian lieutenant with one massive hand and stuffed the struggling mortal into its fang-lined maw. Teeth like murderous blades, crunching through carapace armour and bone alike. Shreds of the traitor marine's armoured skin still hanging from its monstrous wings. The corn demon strode through the compound, crushing concrete walls beneath, hooves of bronze, and dispensing fiery death with its burning lash. The Inquisitor walked through the burning rubble of the mining outpost, his rugged, bearded face set in an inscrutable frown. It was clear from his expression that the events that had taken place here bore more terrible consequences for the Imperium. A squad of Ultramarines followed him over the battlefield, the proud Space Marines maintaining strict file order at all times. Every member of the squad, despite preserving his exterior impassive calm, looked on in horrified disbelief at the scene. The entire frontier fort had been razed to the ground, not a wall left standing. The occasional corpse of a Chaos Space Marine lay in the ashes, but they were far outnumbered by the butchered carcasses of the frontiersmen and Cadian shock troops littering the ground. What manner of war-born atrocities had been committed here? Everything about the Chaos Space Marines sickened the Ultramarines to the core. The Night Lords, and those other heretics who had pledged their allegiance to the warband, were the total antithesis of the Emperor's loyal chapters. They tore down that which once they had created, and which the Ultramarines now strove to protect. They showed no remorse at wiping out the entire population of a planet, and all because of some misguided, megalomaniacal notion that they had something better to replace it with, that they could better control. Oh, how the Inquisitor lamented the weakness of the human condition. How could the Emperor's finest Space Marines have let themselves fall so far from the Emperor's saving grace? What was this dark power that could have caused the Ultramarines' brethren to become no better than wild animals with all humanity gone? Not a single soul remained alive or free from eternal damnation, the Inquisitor noted mentally. There was no sign of the women and children. No doubt they were already chained within the bellies of the Night Lord's ships, bound for a life of slavery on one of the abominable demon worlds at the edge of the Eye of Terror. The Inquisitor had long suspected that the Night Lords would eventually find their way to the world of Purgatory, and when they did, all humanity would tremble before their treacherous plan. For buried beneath the surface of the planet was an artifact spoken of in hushed whispers and accompanied with warding gestures among the Ordo Malleus. Through divination carried out by the psychers of the Inquisition. The doomsday weapon, known only as the Hand of Night, had been located on the small forgotten world. Said to be a gift of the dark gods, sent to the physical universe straight from the heart of the realm of chaos. Nothing was compared to it in power, not even the planet-scouring process of the Exterminatus. Sending tendrils of mental energy into the ether surrounding the planet, the Inquisitor sensed that something was missing from the heavily traumatized psychic aura of Purgatory. Something large, devastating, and tainted with the corrupting power of the warp. He knew then that he was too late. The Night Lords, and a weapon with which whole star systems could be ransomed, were gone. Battle on the planet of death. "Get down!" yelled Commissar Borg, as the bolter shots held around their heads. As one, the warriors of First Company threw themselves into the dust and lay there still as corpses. Which is what we all soon will be, thought Wolf, if we don't get out of this death trap. He clutched his las rifle tighter in his grip and surveyed his surroundings, hoping for some glimpse of the enemy who was killing them. Borg still stood upright, surveying his men, ignoring the bolter shots coming in from all directions and the explosions all around his feet. Clouds of dust sullied the Commissar's once immaculate black uniform, and tarnished the silver skulls of his collar studs. But somehow Borg still managed to seem as relaxed as if he were on parade. "Get into cover!" he yelled, not even flinching, as tracer fire whistled by his ear. He paused, took careful aim with his bolt pistol, and snapped off a shot. Somewhere in the distance there was a gurgling scream. "Get off the road!" Wolf surveyed the jungle wearily. The trees overhung the road at this point, and covered the hillside on either side of the valley. Bloated red and green tendrils of blood fern leapt up like explosions of colour round the bases of the giant conifers. The sweet, narcotic perfume of the bitter blooms filled the air. Tiny, jewelled lizards, distant cousins of the greater man-high carnivores of the plains, surveyed him with cold eyes. The dull lustre of their greenish scales reminded him of orcs. What a terrible place to die, he thought. He had never imagined he would go to greet the Emperor from some north country jungle in some forsaken backwater world, in a remote corner of the Imperium, when he was inducted into the Guard. But then again, he always imagined a heroic ending in a magnificent battle, not a bolter shell through the head in a skirmish against Orc raiders. A bolter shell bit into the ground in front of his face. He blinked as a shower of grit and small pebbles swirled around his head. His eyes felt red and irritated. He spat out a mouthful of dry dust. Off to his left he heard a scream. Twisting his head, he saw Balthus. The big man writhed around on the ground like a maddened serpent. Suddenly he tried to pull himself upright, and Wolf saw to his horror that half his comrade's chest had been blown away. Balthus was already dead. He just didn't have the sense to know it yet. Wolf needed no more encouragement to heed the Commissar's order. He pulled his legs up underneath him and ran, half crouching towards the edge of the track, doing his best to ignore the hail of auto-gun fire that whizzed around him. Fighting back panic at the sound of another death scream, he pulled himself to his full height, felt one single moment of stark terror at the thought of the great target he made, and then threw himself headlong into the bushes like a man plunging into water. The foliage bent all around him, leaves whipped past his face. He closed his eyes tight. All the air went out of him as he hit the ground and went sliding on his face down the slope by the Emperor's throne. The trees concealed a hidden drop at the road edge. All he could do was grit his teeth and try not to scream as he half fell, half slid. This must sound like a berserk rhinodon thrashing around here, he thought. His only hope was that there was so much else going on that the ambushers wouldn't notice him. He landed rolling, as he had been taught in basic martial arts training back on Armageddon so long ago. The move brought him smoothly to his feet, in the open ground between patches of undergrowth. All around, The giant trees soared skyward, their tips ending nearly 600 feet above his head. Wolf was a city boy, a product of the unending corridors of the great hives of Armageddon. He felt more at home in the green light beneath the jungle canopy than he did beneath the open sky, but he was still uneasy. The open ground made him nervous. Still, it seemed that yet again some perverse whim of the Imperium's vast bureaucracy had brought him here to fight where he was least at home. Balthus had always claimed that there was a method to this, that the Imperium always sent their men where they would learn something new, become hardened till only the toughest of the tough survived. Wolf doubted it. He just knew that somewhere a clerk in the purple and gold robes of the Adeptus Administratum was sticking a jewelled pin into a star chart. He forced himself to smile at the thought, to try and see some humour in this desperate situation, to try and make himself not think about the fact that he was apparently alone at the bottom of this slope in a jungle full of orcs. Wearily he scanned his surroundings, caught the sound of thrashing in the undergrowth in the middle distance, and hurried towards it, using every scrap of cover, hoping it was what survived of his squad. Suddenly he found himself sharing a bush with a small green figure about half his height. The thing grinned with fear, revealing rows of sharp pointed teeth. Its pointed green ears went erect with fright, its yellowish eyes widened. It tried to swing its auto-gun round to bear on him. Gretchen, he thought. Almost without thinking, Wolf lashed out with the butt of his las rifle. He felt a satisfying crunch as it made contact with the Gretchen's skull. The little greenskin was sent flying backwards. Wolf hit it again and again, until it lay still. The chorus of howls erupted in the forest once more. He saw the red glitter of lasfire wink in the distance, and saw the answering flash of bolt guns. For a moment he froze. Part of him wanted to duck back into cover and huddle there until the fighting was over. He wasn't a space marine. A cowardly voice that he knew was his own told him. He lacked those giant warriors' utter dedication and fearlessness. He was just a man. Another voice told him that his best chance of survival lay with getting back to his unit, where he would be surrounded by comrades who would cover his back and add their firepower to his own. He also knew that if any help came, it would come to the company. After a moment's reflection, he decided to listen to the second voice. He moved once more towards the combat, trusting to his flak armour to protect him. The sounds of fighting were close now. He could see a small building amid the conifers, the ruins of some incredibly ancient shrine. He could hear Borg booming orders and see lasfire scorch the building's walls. Through arched window slits, bolters pumped in green fists, sending answering fire back at the Imperial Guard. He heard the growling, booming voices of orcs roaring and grunting in their bestial tongue, and he heard the high-pitched answering squeaks of their Gretchen slaves. Some of the greenskins had obviously retreated here after the ambush. Maybe it was even some kind of command post. Wolf ran up to rejoin his squad. "Where have you been?" he heard the corporal ask. "Decide to take a little stroll?" Wolf smiled, rose to one knee, and snapped off a shot at the building. Something inside screamed. "Squad Alpha, work your way around the back of that place. I want it surrounded. None of those greenskins are to get out alive." "Yes, Commissar," said the corporal. With a wave of his arm, he gestured for the squad to filter out and around the building. Wolf found himself close to the point, hoping that they were not walking into yet another ambush. Sweat ran down his back now. His stomach felt tight and fluttery. He noticed a flicker of movement up ahead, saw a thick green arm lob something in their direction. He had only an instant for the flicker of recognition to pass through his mind. "Frag grenade!" he shouted. "Get down!" He gave the man next to him a shove and then leapt to one side. His warning chime came too late for the corporal and the man beside him. The grenade tore them apart, sending gobbets of flesh splattering all around. Wolf was still wiping blood from his face when the orcs were upon them. Giant, horn-helmeted figures with mighty axes clutched in one fist, bolt pistols in the other. They were huge, taller than a man and maybe twice as heavy. Wolf didn't need a medical examination to tell him that all that extra mass was going to be muscle. He snapped off a shot at the charging orc, catching it in the arm. It ignored the wound as if it felt no pain. Probably too stupid, Wolf thought sourly, as he ducked the sweep of the axe's enormous blade and caught the orc a solid, meaty blow on the ribs. The orc just laughed. A second guardsman threw himself forward. The orc blocked his las rifle and sent him sprawling backwards, entrails erupting through a massive gash in his stomach. Wolf took the opportunity to bludgeon it on the head. The orc groaned and went down. Wolf glanced about him. All around he could see knots of figures engaged in frantic close combat. Slowly and inexorably, it seemed, as if the greenskins were getting the upper hand. All around him he heard the sounds of axes biting flesh. Wolf began to feel very afraid. Imperium. Feeling apprehensive, Monarch walked towards the unit's remaining Titans. In the shadow of the ravaged buildings, the giant war machines were lined up like guardsmen on parade. There was a beaten air about them, which not even the warped runner's centuries of tradition could counter. The warlords were shabby and dirty, covered in the fine grey dust that rose from the plains of Talan during the long dry summer. He looked up and saw several of the Adeptus Mechanicus standing on a maintenance tower besides the battered old Spirit of Victory. They were doing the final spot welds that would reattach its damaged left arm. One turned to look down at him as he passed. The blank glass eyes of its mask seemed to gaze at him indifferently. He waved jauntily to the tech priest, but he had returned to contemplating the mysteries of the machine. Beneath the waiting ranks of Titans, the crew slumped atop their bedrolls and equipment packs. Some were rolling dice, some were sprawled out asleep. The distant thumping of mole mortars caused sweat to run down Monarch's back. But it concerned the crews as little as the great clouds of flies. They ignored both. Looking at these shabby, unkempt men, with their cold eyes and hard-bitten faces, Monarch felt conspicuous and out of place. His new dress uniform and clean-shaven features marked him as a newcomer among those who had fought the long, losing summer campaign against the rebels. He heard someone snigger and mutter something about boys fresh in from command school. Someone made a crack about nobles of high birth and how it was a bad sign when a heaven-born princeling was sent to the front. It showed how bad things really were. Monarch felt his face flush, and he turned to confront the men. All he saw was carefully blind faces. Monarch rubbed the printed circuit pattern cast tattoos on his cheek, then walked on. Behind him he could hear quiet laughter. He stepped aside into an arched doorway as a full company of space wolves jogged by at the double, bolters held close to their armoured chests, thin, fanatic faces, for once not covered by their sinister helmets. Of all those at Castra Septus, only the Adeptus Astartes seemed oblivious to the possibility of defeat. The image of blank-faced military precision was somewhat dented when the last one to pass winked at him. The new princeps made his way to the feet of the Fortunata Imperatrix, his first command. As he approached, he could see the Moderate scrambling to their feet and standing to attention. He looked up. High on the carapace were the half-visible remains of previous commanders' logos etched into the armour. A crewman was painting on Monarch's own family emblem of a silver robotic fist. Monarch knew that if he survived long enough, then his symbol would be etched onto the Titan by the Adeptus Mechanicus. First, though, he would have to prove himself. The man who had been painting abseiled down the side of the machine. Monarch saw the wires of his safety harness pull taut as he made the hair-raising descent. The painter unclipped himself and jogged over. He halted in front of the new princeps and gave Monarch the warped runner's clenched fist salute. "First Moderate toll, princeps, Fortunata Imperatrix," he said. These are Hazan and Warden, Fist and Plasma, respectively. Monarch returned the salute and introduced himself. He studied his crew carefully. They were all of a type, gaunt, wasted-looking men, with pale faces and tired eyes. Monarch guessed that they spent too much time linked to the Fortunata to get much exercise or sun. He noticed that they wore black armbands over their patched sleeves. They were in mourning. "I understand Princeps Sibelman was killed by a rebel sniper. I am sorry," said Monarch.
"Father, Princeps Sibelman said he always wished to die in battle, sir. We are grieved that he was killed dishonourably."
Monarch could see that it went deeper than that. These men were lost without their leader. It was not surprising. Titan crews were notoriously close-knit, more so even than families. The ties that bound them were forged in battle and stronger than adamantium. Monarch thought back to his childhood and adolescence in the Clone Academy in the Overcity of the Forge World. He remembered the discipline and suspicion and the sense of apartness. He realized that, in a way, he envied these men. "What's the word from on top, Princeps?" asked Hassan, a short, humorous-looking character with "Born to Smash" stenciled beneath his crew insignia. "We stomping out today?" "Looks like a big rebel push across zones green, blue and grey. They're fighting in blue right now." Tall, feral Warden whistled. A long, descending note.
"Looks bad. They could push us back to the Dust Sea. If we lose the spaceport, we'll never be relieved, even if the fleet smashes the rebel blockade."
"We'll have to just see that that doesn't happen, won't we?" said Monarch. He had intended to sound encouraging, but when he saw the contemptuous looks that the Moderati gave him, he wished he had just kept his mouth shut. Suddenly the klaxons blared. Monarch and the Moderati stared at each other for a moment. Then Toll turned and pulled himself up the ladder. The others followed him swiftly, leaving Monarch standing dazed at the Titan's feet. He turned and saw that the crews of the other Titans were boarding as swiftly as possible. Men vaulted from the carapaces, down the hatches, then slammed them closed. He could already hear the low hum of reactors warming up. Toll stuck his head back out of the access port. "Time to get aboard, Princeps. We got to move out. The rebels are coming." Monarch lowered himself into the command chair of the Titan. He plugged the cyberlink cables into his neck sockets, then reached forward, mustering the words of the Litany of Awakening. He threw the great trip switches that would activate the Titan. "Your heart is fire. Let it burn with the rage for the Emperor's enemies," he said. The lights blazed brighter, and over the link he felt the Titan rouse itself from dormancy, like a great beast awakening. "Your limbs are mighty. Let them smite the foes of our Emperor." He ordered the weapons into test mode. The limbs stretched. There was a great creaking as joints strained to move the guns into place. From the Moderati's cabins below, he could hear Toll and the others begin the gunners' chant as they interfaced with their weaponry. Targeting icons were superimposed on his field of vision. He knew that where he could see the head of the Imperial Eagle, there he could direct the firefall. He wondered briefly whether the rebels had replaced the symbol with the Eye of Horus. "The spirit of your fallen are your honour. Let us be worthy of them." He reached out and touched the sacred relics left by the previous Princeps. First, the millennia-old copy of the Liber Belligerum, left by Cask, the first Princeps. Next, the silver hammer, bought from the Forge World by Talon, the ace of 100 kills. With each relic he touched, he fell deeper into the command trance. Finally, as he touched the bullet-holed skull of Silberman, he felt the true presence of the Fortuna Imperiatrix. He was a tiny thing, dwarfed in the shadow of an entity that had lived 1,000 years, that had seen scores of Princeps come and go. He was a mote of light, drifting before a vast, dark shadow. The Titan was awake and aware. He sensed its fierce mind begin to look around for an enemy. He felt it flex its claws as it brought its weapons up to full power. He was aware that the reactor blazed to fiery life. Involuntarily, the void shields cut in. His heart was full of the lust to do violence. The ferocity of the Titan infected him. The ghostly memories of 1,000 battles flickered through his mind, augmenting the desire to rend and destroy. He was a particle of rage, being drawn down into the fierce heart of the Titan. He was being absorbed. Somewhere, in the vast distance, he heard a voice. "Princeps, you must master it, otherwise we will run wild. Princeps, master yourself." Vaguely he recognized the voice as Toll's. He was shocked back to self-awareness. He wanted to reach out and hit the emergency cut-offs, but he realized he must show the Titan who was master. He dropped back into the link. He concentrated his mind as he had been taught and ordered the Titan to power down the weapons. He had been trained to do this, but the teaching machines had not prepared him for the strength of a battle Titan. He had to focus every fibre of his being, every spark of what he was, as he strove for sovereignty over the Fortunata. Sweat ran down his brow. His teeth ground against each other. He felt as if he could never win the unequal struggle. For what seemed like eons, he was locked in a battle of wills with the Titan. He strove to remain firm, to resist the urge, to give up and let it have its way. Eventually he sensed the weapons power down, but he knew that the Titan was not giving up, merely calling a temporary truce. This was simply a first encounter, a gauging of strength. When he opened his eyes, he was surprised to see that only a few seconds had passed. The Marines were still forming up in squads and clambering aboard their rhinos. A fleet of jet bikes had just taken off and was arcing skyward towards the north. Over the shattered roof of a tumble-down building, he saw a line of predators roar off into the distance. A warhound stalked forwards, weapons raised to attack position. The spirit of Imperial victory swung out to follow it, banners fluttering. Monarch ordered the Fortunata to take its place in the line. Painfully slowly, the Titan obeyed. "Perimeter secured," he heard the Marine commander report over the comnet. Monarch ordered the Titan to stop. It did so, reluctantly. "Rebels will be here soon," said Hassan. "Bring them on," said Wardham. "We were sure to settle with them for further supplement." They settled into a tense silence, while the red clouds boiled overhead, revealing the yellow sky. Monarch watched couriers on motorbikes race between positions, carrying satchels of orders too secret to be transmitted by data pulse. He felt uneasy. The men he was about to fight had once been loyal Imperial soldiers, brother Marines and Order members. He wondered what had caused them to betray the Emperor. Why had they become traitors? He realized that he might soon be dead, that he might never know. He found that thought almost as disturbing as the prospect of death. More squads of space walls were moved up, positioning tarantula las cannon in the cover of the old houses. Land speeder scouts raced towards the horizon. Monarch jacked the Titan's senses up to maximum, trying to ignore the fear that churned in his gut as he probed for some sign of the enemy. The horizon remained empty, even to the far-seeing eyes of the Fortunata. "Come on," he heard Tal muttering. Then suddenly the enemy was there. They had come over the curve of the planet. Thousands of small blips in the sensorium of the Titan. "My God," he heard Warden mutter. "There are dozens of them." It took a moment to register that he was talking about enemy Titans. Monarch looked up and saw endless lines of them rise over the horizon. "Fire at will," Monarch said. The traitors advanced confidently on the doomed position. Inquisitor KRUGER. Outside the storm raged. Coriolis's winds, capable of stripping a man to the bone, lashed against the armoured sides of the hive. The flicker of lightning sent a flare of white, slashing across the room. Moments later, thunder spoke with the voice of an angry god. The ghostly afterimage of the lightning bolt drifted like a snake of fire across Inquisitor KRUGER's field of vision. He took 3 deep breaths and interlocked his fingers like a man praying. I jumped, he thought. By the Emperor. I must be more nervous than I thought, he smiled coldly. He had every reason to be nervous. Everything he had learned since his arrival on Gehenna Prime had given him cause to be nervous. Slowly, the details of the room came back into focus. He saw the huge stained glass window, bearing the picture of Sanguinius, Primarch of the Blood Angels, fighting a demon at the ultimate gate. It dominated the entire west wall of the room. The execution was superb. The governor had told him that more than 1 million pieces of coloured armour-glass had gone into the creation of it. The governor had wanted to impress him with the fact that he was cooperating. He had given the Inquisitor one of the most luxurious suites in his own palace, high on Balthazar's spire. The tapestries covering the walls had been imported from Abaddon. They depicted scenes of the Blood Angels' most famous victories. KRUGER was not surprised. The Space Marine chapter was almost worshipped here since the time they had helped drive off the Ork invasion. Here was a picture of the chapter fighting against Orks at Arcana. Blood flowed in the snow as the Orks were driven from the glacial world. Another showed a battle against monstrous 4-armed Genestealers aboard the Space Hulk Sword of Horus. A third showed the fabled battle on the walls of the Emperor's palace, when the chapter had fought in desperate defense of Earth during the final stages of the Horus Heresy 10,000 years ago. In a corner of the room stood a life-size statue, local work, carved from one of the ivory fangs of a desert dragon. It showed Dante himself, a stylized halo playing round his head, dispatching an Ork warlord. The commander of the Blood Angels stood with his boot on the Ork's chest, bolter pointed directly at the greenskin's head. The detail was superb, even showing the campaign badges on Dante's carapace. KRUGER almost laughed. He wished that Commander Dante and a company of his Space Marines were present now. He didn't yet know why, but he was certain that he would soon have need of great warriors. There was something about this entire business that made him nervous. He returned his attention to the terminal on the table in front of him. It was an ancient machine bearing the signs of constant use and reuse. Its keys were carved from ivory, and its hollow screen was supported by leering gargoyles. An umbilical of brass and laser wire connected it to the comms socket in the wall. As he tapped in his information request, the cable pulsed and flickered, and the smell of ozone filled the air. A hissing sound echoed through the chamber, for a moment rising till it was louder than the wind. KRUGER muttered an invocation to the machine god, as he had been taught long ago, and prayed that he did not have to send for a servitor again. Twice the machine had failed that day, and intuition told him he had no more time left to waste. He lit 2 sticks of incense as an offering to the machine, hoping that the vapours would soothe its angry spirits, and administered the ritual blow to the side of the brass casing. He sighed with relief as the images on the hollow screen flickered, then stabilized. The hissing stopped and the smell of ozone was sucked away by the chamber's recyclers. Once more he called up the data he required. Once more he felt numbness and confusion settle in his brain. He knew there was a pattern here. He just had to find it. All this mass of information would give up its secrets to him, if only he could find the key. KRUGER had the instinct of the born Inquisitor. He knew that this vast mountain of facts was trying to conceal something from him. He knew that given time, he could find out what. He just prayed he had that time. One more time, he told himself. What do we have here? First, we have the seemingly exponential growth of the cult of the Emperor's Light. The cult itself seemed normal enough, a manifestation of one of those brief outbursts of fanatical fervour that were all too common in the crowded warrens of hive worlds. Its tenets were simple. Honour the Great Father. Protect your children. Stamp out the enemies of the race. All seemingly laudable to KRUGER. On the face of it, There was nothing here for any Inquisitor to question. Yet KRUGER knew better. All too often, the face of the enemies of man wore the mask of righteousness. What better way for the cults of evil to gain worshippers than by cloaking themselves in the robes of virtue? On the surface, there was nothing to suggest that the cult of the Emperor's Light was such a thing. Yet a few of the details set alarm bells ringing in the back of the Inquisitor's mind. No agent of the governors had been able to gain access to any but the outer circles of the cult, and as the cult had gained power, it had begun to interfere in the politics of the Hive City. Its representatives had gained enormous support in the planetary senate. The Brotherhood of the Emperor's Light, the cult's military wing, had taken to patrolling the streets of the Hive, seeking out so-called deviants and summarily executing them. Meetings of the cult had been attacked by members of the victims' gangs. Some parts of Balthazar Hive were now in a state of virtual civil war, peace being maintained only by a strong presence of the Planetary Defense Force. Who would gain anything from such things, KRUGER wondered. Cults of demon worshippers, dabbling with powers they did not understand. Rogue psychers who wanted some cover for their illegal activities. Potential rebels against the Imperium, or some other, more sinister force. KRUGER continued to sift through the information, trying to analyze many seemingly unconnected facts. Why were all the records of births and deaths on the second sector of third level unavailable? This was the area in which the cult had originated. Had they been lost by some meltdown of the city's ancient data core system, or was there another darker reason? Was it significant that Secundus sector was the area where most of those who worked as cargo handlers in the Hive City spaceport worked? KRUGER thought it all too likely. So often, the spores of heresy were carried across the depths of interstellar space by the great cargo ships. The lightning flashed again. The thunder rumbled, directly overhead this time. The glow globes flickered and died. The Hive had been hit. KRUGER's hand went to the holster of his weapon. For a moment, all power failed. Had the Hive's electrical system been overloaded by the power surge from that mighty blast? Or was some evil force using storm as cover for its approach? KRUGER stood in the absolute darkness of the chamber and tried to remain calm. The lightning flashed again. The silhouette of Sanguinius blazed with fire. Its mighty outline was cast against the chamber's far wall. KRUGER wondered how long the power cuts would last. He could hear no sound from the recyclers. If the generators were not restored soon, then all air would cease to circulate within the spire, and the Hive City and all its inhabitants would suffocate. Other suspicions stole into KRUGER's mind. Security on all levels of the city would have failed with the power. The auto-senses that would warn of intruders were not functioning. KRUGER reached into his belt for his flashlight and scanned about the chamber. He hoped it was only his imagination that was making the air taste stale. He made his way over to the window and looked out through the clear section beneath Sanguinius's wing. The mile-high termite towers of the Hive rose to the horizon, covering everything in view. All the other spires glittered. 1 billion points of light covered their surfaces. KRUGER knew that each point was a window. On the flat tower top of the spaceport squatted the half-mile-long bulk of a cargo barge. The glow globes flickered to life once more as power was restored. The hollow screen of the comm terminal was blank for a moment, then filled with random garbage. KRUGER tapped in his information request once more and returned his mind to the puzzle. He analysed the tenets of the cult. The Emperor was the father of man. We are all his children. Children are sacred. We must protect the children till they are old enough to protect themselves. Sudden insight, bright and clear as a lightning flash, filled his mind. He knew the answer. All the signs were there. He reached for the ComWeb vocalizer. He must get word to the governor. He hoped he wasn't too late. The lightning flashed once more. Shadows raced away from the window. Kruger blinked, and as his vision cleared, he noticed that the door of his chamber was open, and a cloaked figure stood there. Suddenly, Kruger was glad to have his gun in his hand. He aimed it directly at the intruder. How had he got past the Imperial Guardsmen in the outer chamber? Kruger wondered. Were there secret passages here within the hive? From what Kruger knew of court intrigues in Balthazar's Spire, it was perfectly possible. "Who are you?" he asked. The intruder threw back the cowl of its cloak to reveal an enormous head. Tiny, ferocious eyes leered at the Inquisitor from each side of its misshapen head. Huge jaws opened wide to reveal row upon row of shark-like teeth. Thick, viscous saliva dripped from the open mouth to stain the intricate rugs on the floor. 4 mighty, muscular arms stretched from below the cloak, each ended in deadly, grasping claws. Kruger gasped, knowing now that his suspicions were correct. Gene stealers were present on Gehenna. The cult must be their front. He knew now that it was vital that he got word not just to the governor but to the Imperial authorities. A gene stealer presence was a threat, not just to this world, but to all its neighbours in the sector. If it was not stamped out now, this alien corruption would spread. His heartbeat raced. The grip of his pistol felt sweaty in his palms. With eye-blurring swiftness, the gene stealer leapt forward. Kruger squeezed the trigger.
Duel. A Silver Templar's story. The Emperor fell as Lieutenant Keltos of the Silver Templars reached the ford trenches. Explosions reaved the Emperor's feet, shattering his shins and pitching him onto his face. The towering statue smashed down, its legs on one side of the deep chasm and its head and shoulders embedded on the other. Around Keltos, Astra Militarum soldiers cried out in shock, priests and officers shouting orders at them to adjust their targeting and hold their lines. "By the throne, is there no deed to which these heretics will not stoop?" boomed Intercessor Sergeant Dimitrian. "Not to compliment the treacherous dogs, but it is a daring move," replied Keltos. "With the Charybdian and Skylas bridges demolished, the Astra Militarum should have been able to hold the enemy beyond at bay indefinitely. Instead, the Black Legionnaires are about to force a beachhead at a wholly unexpected point. Or, rather, they would have, if not for us." The chasm had been opened during the early days of the war for Ultark, a result of tectonic convulsions caused by orbital bombardment. Many miles in length, it had ripped through the macro-industrial tangle of Phaeonices' hive. The chasm was a 300-foot wide gulf that dropped a quarter of a mile into seething lava. Bridges had been raised to allow Imperial forces to push across the gap in the sector. Now, with the heretics staging a furious counter-offensive, those same bridges had been demolished in the hope of stalling the enemy's momentum. Now, in response, the Chaos Forces had fashioned a bridge of their own. A squad of figures in Baroque power armor was already storming onto the statue's far end. "Black Legion," spat Brother Thassos. "Turncoat scum. Thank the Emperor that Liberian Achilles foresaw this moment in his visions. Without our aid, these Imperial Guardsmen would never have hoped to stop the attack that is about to hit their lines." "We had best be about it, then," said Dimitrian. "That we had," replied Keltos, drawing his power sword, Mercy. "Brothers, commune with your weapon spirits. Let their strength become yours, and let your wisdom guide that strength. Renew the bond martial, and prepare for battle." Keltos' battle brothers followed his example, offering prayers to the machine spirits of their bolt rifles. The Silver Templars were a chapter of weapon masters and duelists. This was thanks in part to the bond martial, the spiritual link they forged over thousands of hours of practice with their chosen weaponry. It rendered their guns and blades
closer to comrades or familiars than mere tools of war. Keltos thumbed Mercy's activation rune, and its blade crackled with lethal energies. He checked the load on his bolt pistol, then vaulted out of the trench. Keltos launched himself into a pounding run towards the statue's head. "For the Emperor!" he bellowed. Sergeant Dimitrin's intercessors followed, sprinting through the industrial ruins. They dropped into covering positions near where the Emperor's huge marble head had been driven into the Pharecrete. Raising their bolt rifles, the intercessors sighted on the Black Legionaries and loosed a hammering volley of shots. Chaos Space Marines jerked as armor-piercing rounds punched into them. The mass-reactive bolt shells detonated and several of the traitors were flung from the statue bridge, with craters blasted in their bodies. A harsh voice bellowed Vox-amplified orders, and half the remaining Black Legionaries took up firing positions to cover their comrades' advance. They raised bolter guns and let fly. One of Squad Dimitrin gave a cry of pain as heretic shells blew him off his feet. Lieutenant Keltos kept running, shells whipping back and forth around him. Several enemy rounds hit his armor, ricocheting in showers of sparks, but not a single one of his brother's shots even came close to striking him. Each intercessor would have chosen an enemy to engage in a one-sided duel of marksmanship. When their victims were slain, the intercessors would select new foes and repeat the lethal process. Keltos's task was different. They were the shield. He was the sword. The lieutenant gathered himself and sprang. Servos on his armor boosted his prodigious strength and launched him in a soaring leap that saw him slam down upon the Emperor's broad marble back. Keltos leveled his bolt pistol, Absolution, and selected his opponent. He fired. His shots hit the leading Black Legionnaire and blew his arm off, spinning him from his feet and pitching him into the chasm. Keltos advanced into the middle of the statue bridge and planted his feet. As his comrades' fire howled around him, he stood with his blade ready in silent challenge. A response was not long in coming. Shoving his way through the throng came a hulking figure in spiked armor and a horned helm. He wielded a roaring chainsword in each fist, and as he charged, the heretic bellowed a war cry in the same deafening voice Keltos had heard moments before. "Blood for the blood god!" Keltos maglocked his pistol to his thigh, spun his blade in a swift circle, then clasped his grip double-handed. "Come, Mercy, let us end this traitor," he whispered. The Chaos Space Marine came in like a whirlwind, swinging his chain blades in wild arcs. Keltos parried the first swing and wove around the second. He stepped smartly back, then spun to deliver a powerful cut that should have bisected the champion at the waist. It was blocked by the crossed blades of the warrior's chainswords, and with a bellow the heretic heaved Keltos backwards. Another snarling blade swing carved a chunk from the lieutenant's shoulder guard, and jarred his arm so badly he almost dropped Mercy. To lose his bonded weapon in such a way would have been unforgivable for a Silver Templar. Keltos would rather have lost his arm than his blade. The lieutenant gave ground, reading every nuance of his foe's fighting style and assessing his options. Decades of one-on-one blade duels against every conceivable type of foe had prepared him to defeat enemies far more skilled than this berserk brute, he thought contemptuously. By the time the monstrous champion came at him again, Keltos was ready. Rather than parry, he wove aside from the first swing, ignoring the buzzing teeth that chewed past his right ear. Keltos dropped low. The second chainsword whined above his head. Overcommitted to his furious attack, the Chaos Champion was left open for a split second. It was enough. In a single smooth motion, Keltos lunged, driving the point of his crackling blade up into the Chaos Space Marine's chest plate. The power sword's molecular disruption field parted ceramite. Flesh and tainted bone as though they were water. Foul blood spilled down Keltos' arm in a steaming flood, and he ripped Mercy upwards to complete his killing blow. The Chaos Champion staggered, mangled organs pulsing in the gory ruin of his chest. Then he gave a rattling gasp and toppled backwards, crashing to the ground. Bolt shells still flew back and forth along the bridge. The enemy was still pressing, but they were weary now. Their numbers more than halved.
"Our support is 5 minutes out, brother lieutenant,"
voxed Sergeant Dimitrin, bolt rifle hammering.
"We just have to hold the enemy until the Storm Ravens arrive. Then they'll put enough rockets into this bridge to pulverize it. We'll ask the Emperor's forgiveness afterwards."
"Just so, Sergeant," replied Keltos, flicking the blood from Mercy's blade and drawing his bolt pistol. "Choose your opponents and bring them down, brothers. We will duel the foe until the gunships arrive to finish the job. For the Emperor!"
"For the Emperor!" they cried, and the roar of their bolt rifles echoed their oath.
Dark Communion. Narrated by Aborder Prince. For over 10,000 years have I lived, intoned the Chaos Warrior. For over 100 centuries have I fought the long war. 88 million hours cannot contain my hatred. For over a day now, the Space Hulk, Reaper of Souls, had held its orbit over the doomed planet. Brother Captain Carlson studied the world visible through the huge art of the stained glass window. It glittered like a jewel in the blackness of space. Its greenness mocked him. Down there, people went about their daily business. They lived their lives, secure in the knowledge that their Emperor and his mighty legions protected them. Carlson laughed his hollow laugh. It bubbled horribly from his ruined throat. Today, that ended. Their stupid, ordered lives were over. They were insects dwelling in an insect's nest. They lived insect lives and never understood the true nature of the universe, a place of predators who preyed on body and soul. The fold down there was sheep. Let the sheep look up, thought Carlson. Let them know the wolves are about to descend on the fold. Let them pray to their senile god and know that he cannot save them. Their world will burn, he swore. They will pray for death. Their weapons will not save them. Their armies will not protect them. Their pitiful faith will not shield them. They will die, and their souls will be consigned screaming to the warp. This I swear by the honor of my chapter and all the powers of chaos. But for now, let them wait, for I must celebrate the Dark Communion. He looked down at the throne in which he rested. The ancient brass was moulded in the shape of a mythical beast of old Earth. Life support tubes connected it to the rebreathers of his ancient armor. The 10,000-year-old runes flickered and glowed in the chill darkness, sending out messages that only a few now living could read and fully understand. Carlson studied the walls of this ancient chamber with his baleful red glare, noting, as if for the first time, the gargoyles that guarded each doorway and the sign of the Eye of Horus that enclosed the stained glass window. He noticed the cracked and flaking tiles that covered the ceramite floor, and recalled that once they had contained a mosaic depicting the attack on the Emperor's palace during the long-ago battle for Earth. The picture was long gone, worn away by 1,000,000 footfalls down the long centuries. Carlson lashed the metal tentacles that replaced his left hand and reflexively worked the action of the bolter fused to the stump of his right wrist. There were times he felt like this Space Hulk, like a strange agglomeration of random bits, hastily and crudely connected to an ancient central core. He knew the Space Hulk was a jumble of the flotsam and jetsam of interstellar space, that had been sucked through the warp to the demon worlds, had drifted for centuries, till it had integrated into this vast vessel. Whatever shape the Hulk had originally possessed was long gone. He was like that. A millennia of mutation, of gifts from his patron chaos power, had cost him his original shape. No longer was he a tall, powerful space marine garbed in ceramite armor. Now he was an inhuman thing, a patchwork of many strange pieces. Only the original body shape and the mind was still Carson's, and sometimes he was not sure even of that. Could any mind remain intact after 10,000 years? Would it not splinter under the impact of all that accumulated experience? Would not the years bring madness? Instinctively, Carson knew that he had gone mad many times. There had been centuries when he had gibbered insanely, years when he had reiterated a single crazed chant. He knew that he had lost so much. No mind could hold all his memories. They overflowed like wine from an overfilled cup. It was part of the gift and the curse of his immortality. That was why, when they could, he and his men celebrated the Dark Communion. They preserved what was important. They stayed themselves and did not devolve into howling chaos spawn. In the end, when all was said and done, they were Space Marines. They had a Space Marine's pride. Carson cleared his mind, as he had learned so long ago. He turned his gaze inward. He needed no drugs, no chants, none of the aids and adjuncts that lesser sorcerers used. He had 10 millennia of practice, and his powers were strong. He envisaged a vast cavern, the walls of which were lined with pigeonholes. In each pigeonhole was a glowing gem. Each glowing gem was a memory, one that he had chosen to preserve. It would remain in this protected space within his mind for as long as he would live. Carson had achieved the first level of the ritual. Now he reviewed last year, winnowing his memories for deeds he wished to preserve. Was there anything worth keeping, worth preserving from time's slow erosion? That battle on Kadavar, perhaps, where they had aided those pitiful rebels against their Imperial masters, and where he had killed the Blood Angel in the desecrated rubble of the Shrine of the Emperor's Ascension. Yes, he thought, recalling the moment with satisfaction. That was worth preserving. He visualized the scene clearly. The Blood Angel crawling from the ruins, his armor all pitted and cracked. Nearby lay the huge skull of a destroyed Warhound Titan. In the distance loomed the skeletal remains of Kadavar's sky-scraped towers. He had the moment perfectly. He could taste the dry, burned taint in the air, feel the kick of his bolter, hear the groans of the wounded, smell the stink of molten metal, sense the departure of the Blood Angel's soul. He fixed the memory, reduced it to something hard and bright and pure, then left it in its assigned place. There was nothing else he wanted to preserve. Now came the next stage. He examined his memories. Now he exulted in who he was and how he came to be. He reached for the gems of memory, and they came to him, one by one. He was on Prospero, home world of his order. From the balcony of his tower he could see the mile-high spire where dwelled Magnus, Primarch of his order. The air of the city crackled with hundreds of potent enchantments. His spellbook floated in front of him. He knew that Magnus had been right to defy the Emperor's interdict against the study of magic. It was so fascinating, and they had learned so much. Soon they would use their spells to smite the Emperor's enemies, and the ruler of mankind would be forced to see the error of his ways. I was a fool then, thought Carson. We were all fools. He reached for another memory. Anger at the betrayal filled his mind. The Emperor had declared them heretics, outcasts. Their knowledge was deemed forbidden. They were to be purged. The Space Wolves had been dispatched to cleanse Prospero. They were forced to flee. In that moment, Carlson realized that the Emperor was a fool and all his followers were dupes. He was jealous of any power he did not understand. Perhaps he feared a potential rival. Whatever his reasons, it did not matter. The Thousand Sons must take their ships and accept War Master Horus's offer of sanctuary. It was their only chance of survival in the turbulent period of civil war. The only way to protect what they had gained. Another scene filled his mind. He aimed his bolter with the Loyalist and pulled the trigger. The man screamed and fell. Laser fire scorched the pavement all around him, but the shimmer of his protective spells warded it from his body. In the distance he could see the mountain-high silver walls that protected the Emperor's palace. Overhead, the blue sky of Earth was filled with ships. This was the final battle. Today, the fate of the galaxy would be decided. The scene melted into another memory of that awesome battle. He stood before the gleaming black valves of the ultimate gate, the towering portal that guarded the entrance to the inner palace. All around him, he sensed the press and surge of bodies. Overhead, an angel-winged man in blood-red armor wrestled with a huge bat-winged demon. With a final, mighty surge, the demon cast the man down. Carlson heard the granite crack, and his roar of triumph mingled with 10,000 other voices. He watched the Earth recede behind him through the armor-glass window of the spacecraft. The taste of defeat was bitter in his mouth. The Emperor had defeated War Master Horus. Loyalist reinforcements approached Earth, bearing the accursed Space Wolves and the Dark Angels. They were defeated. The rebellion was over. Now they must flee to the edge of the galaxy, to the one place their foes would not dare pursue them, to the Eye of Terror. He stood amid the rubble of Prospero and watched the sky change colour. His voice mingled with the chanting of his brothers. Chain lightning crackled from horizon to horizon. Pain filled him as he forced his mind to the task. The towering presence of Magnus was there, calming him, reassuring him that what they attempted could be done, that they could indeed shift an entire world through the warp to the Eye, that their ancient world could be theirs again. He raced down a long street between low, squat buildings. Behind him he heard the whoosh of displaced air. Turning, he snapped off a shot with his bolter. The long, sleek Eldar jet bike jinked to one side, and the shot ricocheted from the walls. He looked in horror at his hand. It was starting to change. The fingers were lengthening. Already they had fused with his gauntlet, and he could not take it off. Was this the result of long-term exposure to the warping influence of chaos within the Eye of Terror, or something else? His armor was already changing, flowing into a new style. Tiny metal skulls covered his belt. A demon's head leered from his shoulder guard. Fear of the change filled him. He stood in the long hall of a tumbled-down building. The roof had long collapsed, and cold stars glittered in the sky. The demon crouched in front of him, confined by the pentacle and the power of his will. It snarled, and flickers of warp flame emerged from its mouth. It did not want to share its wisdom with him, but he knew that soon it would. He wrapped his tentacle around the throat of the blue-armored ultramarine. The man struggled and writhed in his grip, frantically trying to break his grip and bring his bolter to bear. It was a hopeless struggle. Slowly, inexorably, Carlson lifted him and with one mighty heave threw him off the top of the tower. He watched with satisfaction as the man tumbled headlong to the ground over a mile below. The fight was over. The last Ultramarine on the planet was dead. The Governor's palace was theirs. On and on it went. Memories flickered through his mind, reminding him of ancient triumphs and ancient deeds, of all the things he desired to remember and some of the things he would like to forget but could not. The touch of his sergeant brought him from his reveries. He looked up into Kane's twisted goat face.
What is it?
Ships rise from the planet, brother Captain. Defenders come to meet us.
Good, thought Carlson. Perhaps this planet should provide us with some sport after all. There we have it. there we have it. I finally found it. For those long-term viewers, you will know that I have been looking for this story for a long time. I've described it many times about there's a Chaos Champion on a ship and how he preserves his memories. It's one of my oldest memories of like a Warhammer 40k story, bit of lore, whatever. And I know I'll tell you, I'll even bore you and I'll tell you where I first read this and when. Right, and the circumstances behind this. Okay, this is some deep lore on me personally. And Warhammer in general, I think. And if you're of a certain age, it'll probably ring true for you as well. So, this is called Dark Communion. I couldn't remember what it's called. I couldn't remember where I read it. Now, someone in the live chat recently, while I've been doing this sort of radio thing, as a test, and I'll continue to do that. If you're listening to this now, in the future, this obviously doesn't matter. If you're listening to this right now and I put it out within a few days, I'm going away. So I'm not going to have that left on, because it'll probably burn my house down, you understand? So I'm going to have to turn it off. But when I come back home, I'm going away for like a work stuff and various other things, and some scouting on some future content, you know, things coming up. So but I'm not going to leave my computer running, because for one, it'll probably burn my computer out, and two, like, yeah, I know that my house will burn down. It's like when, you know, you can't remember quite if you turn the cooker off, you know what I mean? And you're driving, and even though if you're like half an hour away, you're like, I've got to go back home. I've got to go back home and check, even when you get there. Even though when you get there, it's already turned off. Anyway, I'm just ranting. So, this is a classic for me, and one of the most important pieces of stuff, like lore, Warhammer stuff that I actually have in my mind. I read it when I was like 11, 12. And I'll tell you the circumstances of how I got this. So, I think is it the second edition or third edition? It's the set with the Blood Angels on the front, with the where you get the two squads of Space Marines, the old school Space Marines, you know, where they're basically just attached to the gun, and you know, it's got the big rocket launcher and stuff. I'll put a picture up, hopefully, if I remember, on the screen, and you get all the Gretchen and all the Goths, and it's like on Armageddon. A great set, you know. But this was like mid-90s that came out. Now, when I got into Warhammer, it was because the first time I ever saw Warhammer stuff was actually because a friend of mine, a couple of friends of mine, I went to a primary school where the people were probably like, they were all very middle class, and I'm working class as hell, you know what I mean, like insanely working class. Not that I've come from a bad household or anything like this, you know, my family are nice and stuff like that, but like, I'm definitely from the lower economic rung, you know, like, it by all rights, I shouldn't be where I am now, and it's probably just by, I don't want to sound like a big head, because I'm not. You get me? It's just by a happy circumstance that I'm probably brighter than I probably should be, and I've managed to do more than most people manage to do. Right, like on paper, I should be on a much lower socio-economic bracket, you know, social bracket, you know, cultural bracket. I should be a lot lower, but for some reason, by chance, I ain't. Although I do sound rough as fuck. But anyway, that's a whole different thing. What I mean by this is, Warhammer used to be, and still is to a large extent, a very middle class hobby for a lot of people. And if you are, no, fair play, you know what I mean? I'm not like some class warrior or anything like this. But it's like, you know, obviously, you're not getting many chavs in your games workshops, you know? It's very much middle class sort of young lads for the most part, you know? Geeky young lads from reasonably prosperous households, because who else can afford to blow this much money on plastic toys? Now, unfortunately for me, my mum got me into a reasonable primary school with a lot of middle class people, so a lot of them started getting into Warhammer. Now obviously I'm quite from a bit of a poor background, so I couldn't really afford stuff. For instance, like I would get like my pocket money was £1 a week, you know. Now I know money's changed a bit over the last like 20 years or so, but still you can appreciate that even back then £1 a week wasn't worth much when you think that like you know, a Chomp or a Tazo chocolate bar, they were like 10 pence, you know. A pack of football cards would have been like 50 pence, you get me? So having £1 a week pocket money, that's it. It isn't much, is it, you know? Now unless people gave me money, which sometimes they did, obviously family members, or bought me things, you know, I didn't really have any other option but to save my money. Like I even had a paper round. I worked 6 days a week as a paper boy for 3 years, and I only made £7.50. I'm going on about this way too much. But anyway, basically what I'm saying is I didn't have much money for stuff. So my Warhammer stuff was very precious to me because it's stuff I'd saved a lot for. Basically, that's what I'm saying. Like, I had to really save for, and I felt really lucky whenever I got any kind of Warhammer stuff. Like, family members gave me a $5, you know. And this is, again, you know, Warhammer stuff was cheaper back then, but it was still really expensive. You know, comparatively, it's probably about the same now. It's probably more now than it was then, actually. But, you know, when I'm on £7.50 a week paperboy money, and you know what I mean, you're not going to, you know, I got to do stuff as well, you know what I mean? I'm a young lad. I got to go cinema and stuff like this, you know? Like, I had other things to spend my money on. So buying Warhammer stuff was like a really precious big deal for me. So one day, this is where I'm leading to. One day, on a Saturday, I'm at home, and my mum walks through the door. She's been shopping, walks through the door, and she's got this box set. I'm like, what the fuck? And she's like, yeah, they're in Argos. They were selling them for like about like a quarter of the normal cost. So she said, I thought I'd pick you one up because I know you'd like it. And I was like, I was overcome, you know what I mean? So instead of whatever they used to cost, like probably 60 quid or whatever, this cost like £15 or £10 or something, she said. And I've never understood why. I've never heard anyone else mention this or anything. But that's the only reason I've got this box set. That's the only reason I've got these books and stuff like that. And managed to read all these things and got this sort of this starter set of stuff, which was great for me because it like instantly doubled the amount of Warhammer stuff I had. You know, I actually had some Warhammer stuff all of a sudden. I could actually play games, even though we weren't really playing games properly. We didn't really understand the rules. But that's why I got this book. Now, as I understand it, I imagine what it is GW were getting rid of a bunch of backlog stock of these starter sets because they had the new version of the game came out like a couple of months later. You know, the one with, I'll put a picture up of that as well. The one with Dark Angels and Space Marines in it. Sorry, I've just hit the mic. Getting too excited. So they were trying to get rid of stock and basically they sold it to Argos. Now, if you don't know what Argos is like, it's less prominent now, but back in the day, about like 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was like a much bigger thing on the sort of high streets, and it still is. It's the thing that have the catalogues, and that's where people would go and buy their things. It was like a big retail store, but it was one of them where you'd fill in the ticket and you'd wait in a line and they'd go into a warehouse and grab it for you and bring it out, unless they had the stuff right there on the floor. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. So yeah, I think that's what it was. GW was just getting rid of a bunch of stock back in the late 90s in preparation for this new launch, which was the big launch really, which really propelled Games Workshop into the big leagues, because I guess you would say, sort of culturally and everything. That was the one there. They really went professional, like went mainstream-ish. The start of their ascension to mainstream-ish. That edition and all the sort of hype and marketing that went around that, and the much more professional look to things. This was that was the edition. So they were getting rid of this old stuff, and yeah, that's it basically. I managed to get this, so I devoured these books, which I'd never been able to have before. I don't think I actually had, other than like maybe a White Dwarf magazine. Again, buying a White Dwarf magazine was a big deal for me back then, you know, because they were like £3.50, which obviously, like I'm saying, that's half my wage from a paperboy thing. Anyway, so if you're listening to this, you're like, wow, boomers talk a lot about how young they were. One day you'll come to this point and you'll be like, wow, back in my day, that, you know, 10 more years, son. 10 more years, sonny. You'll be looking back and you'll have member berries for all your childhood stuff. But yeah, that's why this story is stuck in my mind, because again, it was like the excitement of having these books to read through and all these new stuff, which I'd never had any of this stuff before, you know. I could only ever buy what I could afford, which was like usually like an individual model or like a tiny box of soldiers. I couldn't actually get, like, you know, this is before the starter sets and all that sort of thing. So actually having the sort of the main game, the box game, was such a great thing for me. I'd never had one before, so it was so exciting. So I read through all the books, and this story really stuck with me because I thought it was so awesome. Because as well, obviously, I didn't understand anything, and back then, obviously, it was all less of it was written, so it was all a lot more vague about the Horus Heresy and about Prospero and all the different legions. There was a lot more mystery to things. It felt like you were being part of a sort of esoteric, arcane world. And because it was before the internet became big as well, like this is, you know, I didn't get the internet probably wasn't a major factor in my life until 2 or 3, maybe even 4 years later. It became so more prevalent within sort of day-to-day life. I mean, I didn't have a mobile phone until like probably 2 years after this, you know, and that was like a Nokia, which was literally just a phone with Snake on it, you know. That's all it was. So it's like a different age. And so the law and stuff like this, you'd go to the shops and you'd speak to people who knew more about the law than you. Hit my mic again. They knew things because they'd read a book that you literally couldn't get a hold of anymore. They'd read a handout of something that Games Workshop printed off and distributed to his shops to be given out to customers. It's just a cool little throwaway thing. They'd read the leaflet or whatever, and they knew stuff that you didn't know, and there was no way of you knowing. You know, it was very much like I imagine like being part of a mystery cult. You know, people who've been in it long and knew stuff more than you. You know, like being part of a cult. I mean, it still is, but like information's a lot more accessible now. But even still, I think a lot of the older stuff, I sometimes take for granted that some things haven't been in production for like 20 years. You know, like for instance, this short story. Unless you specifically went looking for it in some... I mean, this isn't a war gear. This isn't even in the main lore book, you know, the main sort of codex. This is in the side book, which goes into individual weapons. And then it's got all these little short stories. And there are a couple more short stories, which are kind of classics that I will do. And you won't have this ranty bit at the end. But I just thought I'd give you my memories of this. It's one of my favourite stories. And I'm glad I could share it with you. And I hope it gives you some member berries, some nostalgia to all you people, you know, which I think is a good feeling to have these days. Hopefully you've I don't know, I'm gonna go because I'm just ranting and my voice is going, but yeah, and if anyone wondering, I haven't smoked now for 5 weeks, although the urge is still there, and yeah, I've been stuffing I feel worse because I've been stuffing my face to ward off the urge. So I'm fatter than I should be, but I've still been going to the gym, so I'm way stronger. So I'm big, but like I'm way stronger and fitter than I was, but I'm still fatter than I was. I'm in a weird situation. So hopefully now I've weaned myself off the tobacco, I can concentrate on just like losing like probably like 2 stone, probably. It's a lot, 2 stone worth of fat, and then that should complement quite nicely with my muscle gains. Because I feel ripped, man. I feel so powerful. I feel like literally twice as strong as I was like 5 weeks ago. It's crazy, man. But anyway, what is this? What sort of video is this? I really like this old story, and I hope you do too. I'll have some more of these sort of old deep lore short stories coming soon. Again, just be about this ranty bit at the end. But yeah, I'll include that there's a rant at the end. Nostalgia rant. I gotta go anyway. Thank you everybody supporting the channel. With everything that's going on as well, I know there's a lot of stuff going on in the community and everything like this. I don't really keep up with community happenings and stuff because I don't really... There's only 1 or 2 people I follow like who do sort of internet Warhammer stuff. So I'm aware vaguely of like things that are occurring. I don't know what's going on. I will continue to do what I'm doing for as long as I possibly can. But... who knows? In the future, if something happens, it happens. So if you do want to keep up with me and my stuff, I will. Even if I go, even if in the future I don't do Warhammer stuff, I might do other stuff. And I'm definitely doing Lord of the Rings stuff. And at the minute, I've just put a couple of like short things out for Lord of the Rings, just jokey stuff. But I'll be doing some proper big lore videos on different aspects of the universe and talking about stuff, and maybe even do some Middle Earth. The game, you know, the war game stuff. So I'll include links below to that as well. So please do subscribe to me on my Lord of the Rings channel, which I haven't really started using properly at all. But please do subscribe there, because that's where I'm definitely going to be doing stuff. And subscribe to my backup channel, where I'm not at the minute. I just do occasionally a bit of streaming and talking about non-Warhammer stuff on there. But definitely subscribe there, because if anything ever happened to this channel, that's where I'd be, either of those places. So I'll include links to them below. But yeah, everybody supporting the channel, thank you. Again, I will continue to do my stuff until I can't. But yeah, it's pretty messed up. But we'll see what happens, you know. We'll see what happens. That's kind of why I did this. It came at a good time, this nostalgic trek down memory lane for me with the old stories, which reminded me of why really like Warhammer, the Warhammer universe, why I've been into it for so long, for so many years. And yeah, this is a good memory to distract myself from the horrors of the present. Okay, stay well, and yeah, go gym, lift. Makes you better, makes you stronger, makes you, more confident in the world. I find, I definitely feel better anyway, and it's been doing me I've been doing well. I'm smoking as well. I'm so glad I've stopped smoking as well, but I really do want to smoke. Like you said, I haven't done one of these for a couple of weeks, so I forget how to sign off. I'm gonna go. All right, bye bye. Thanks again, everybody. Ta-ra.
And with that, I bid you farewell. I'll be back again with more stuff very, very soon. Big videos on the way, and a couple of not so big ones, but still cool. At least I think so. I'm a bit low energy today. I'm very tired. It's been a busy weekend. And I've got the 6 weeks holidays now with a toddler. It's going to be great. It's going to be great, but still exhausting. I'll be back again very, very soon. And yeah, like I say, please do leave a like and a comment, and make sure you're subscribed. Leave me a hype. Hypes are super important now, apparently. And if you'd like to support me and the channel, please do consider becoming a YouTube member or a patron on Patreon. But I will now say goodbye. Thank you. Ta-ra. Ta-ra. What's on your face is that? Bye-bye.